Chapter 71. I want to be the king of the century. Aegon climbed onto Balerion the Black Dread's forehead. He raised his hand, removed the Valyrian crown studded with brilliant rubies from his head, and held it high. Standing tall and proud, Aegon declared loudly, "The crown makes its wearer appear noble, it is a symbol of status. But its true meaning lies in this. When disaster strikes, I will rise and shield you from it all." In that moment, the wildlings of the north, the knights of the Vale, and the soldiers of the Riverlands all knelt as one. Even the slaves of Volantis fell to their knees in unison. They were all overwhelmed by Aegon's presence, surrendering with unwavering loyalty to the conqueror king. Countless onlookers couldn't help but think, Aegon is so young, yet he already possesses such strength and command. Perhaps he truly can revive the glory of the Valyrian Freehold. The Freehold had once ruled through dragons and sheer force, but Aegon might conquer the known world through dragons and the hearts of men. Without a doubt, this was a flawless performance. With this victory, Aegon's grand conquest surged forward. The Dragonlord's rule began to take root across the vast expanse of Westeros. House Targaryen was no longer seen as foreign or invasive. In the hearts of most in Westeros, Aegon had already become their true king. After holding a ceremony of allegiance at Harrenhal, similar to the one once held at the Eyrie, the massive army stationed at God's Eye began marching south like an unstoppable tide of steel. At the same time, the joint forces of the Riverlands and the Kingdom of the Rock were steadily advancing toward King's Landing. Aegon led his massive army, gathered from many regions, toward the oncoming coalition of the two kingdoms. When the host passed through Stony Sept, several thousand soldiers arrived in haste, direct vassals that Visenya had brought under control in Crackclaw Point. With their arrival, the army grew rapidly, like a snowball gathering strength. Once merged, Targaryen's forces totaled more than 70,000. The march continued, and after another half-month of hard campaigning, Lady Argilla of the Stormlands led 10,000 warriors to join the allied army. Orys arrived shortly after, bringing more than 4,000 warriors to reinforce the cause. At this point, the Targaryen army reached its peak, over 90,000 strong, its momentum like a crashing wave, pressing down on the combined forces of the Riverlands and the Kingdom of the Rock. Although the kings of the Rock and the Reach had joined forces, and Myrn of the Reach proudly called their alliance, our Iron Fist. Their army only numbered 55,000, including 5,000 knights, barely half the size of Aegon's host. The imbalance in numbers was stark. And beyond that, the Targaryen army had 3 terrifying dragons, like mobile war fortresses, each a symbol of overwhelming might. Almost every Targaryen noble believed this would be a battle without suspense. The dawn of victory was already visible. While the Targaryen army continued its advance, Aegon received more secret letters from House Hightower and House Tyrell. In these letters, both houses earnestly expressed their strong desire to remain neutral, making it clear they did not wish to engage in direct conflict with the conqueror's army. Because of this, neither house had dispatched troops to join the coalition of the Rock and the Reach. They chose to stay out of the fray in this fierce contest. At that moment, a war council was underway in Aegon's royal tent. Aegon raised his hand and tossed the secret letters into the roaring fire, shaking his head. They think being fence-sitters will earn them my forgiveness after the war. That's nothing but a fool's dream. Lady Argilla's lips curled into a knowing smile. They're probably still hoping for a reward, or even dreaming of claiming lordship over the Reach. If lordships under the Targaryens could be obtained that easily, said Torrhen coolly, shaking his head, then we lords would become a laughingstock. Aegon remained calm, his tone steady. We'll deal with them after the final battle. Queen Visenya then spoke. Maester Gaun wrote to say the Faith of the Seven is willing to crown you king, but they won't disband their armed forces. How do you plan to respond? Aegon sat upright in the main seat, his eyes sweeping the room as he asked all the gathered high lords. What are your thoughts on this matter? In truth, Aegon was not eager to be crowned again in the great sept of the Faith of the Seven. With overwhelming power in his hands, he had more than enough strength to crush all resistance across the continent. The Faith's offer of goodwill was not something he took very seriously. Lord Torrhen suddenly stood and gave his opinion. I don't think we need to concern ourselves with the Faith of the Seven. They're no different from House Hightower and House Tyrell, fair-weather allies who shift with the wind. There's no reason to give them any respect. The North had always followed the old gods, and Torrhen naturally held deep resentment toward the Faith of the Seven. Lady Argilla, having spent some time alongside Aegon, had keenly sensed his displeasure toward the Faith. She parted her red lips and said with a soft laugh, the faith of the Seven still commands two significant armed factions, the famed warriors' sons and the poor fellows. If your grace intends to move against them, then with our forces already assembled, there may never be a better moment. According to the faith's moral doctrines, bastards were condemned as abominations, children born of sin. Should Lady Argilla bear Aegon's dragonseed, his status as a bastard would be easy leverage for the faith to incite unrest. This would undoubtedly threaten the legitimacy of House Tully's future claim to rule. Edmund, head of House Tully, furrowed his brow and advised solemnly, Your Grace, the faith of the Seven is the dominant religion across Westeros. They are skilled at stirring the common folk into riots and should not be taken lightly. One misstep could spark large-scale rebellion. Many Andal lords are devout followers of the Seven. We must tread carefully. As everyone spoke, Aegon tapped his fingers rhythmically on the table, lost in thought. After a moment, he looked up and addressed his council. We'll make a strategic adjustment. After we defeat the coalition of the King of the Rock and the King of the Reach, the army will immediately march on Aldtown, the headquarters of the Faith of the Seven. The goal is to force the Faith to disband all its military orders. Their religious foundation will remain untouched for now, but they are never to raise a Faith militant again. At these words, the council clearly recognized Aegon's concern about the Faith, so much so that he was willing to alter an already determined conquest strategy. Aegon slowly scanned the room. When he saw everyone nodding in agreement, he continued. Afterward, the army will return to King's Landing in Blackwater Bay, where we will hold a grand ceremony to mark the founding of the Targaryen kingdom. Autumn is coming to a close, and winter will soon blanket Westeros. Harsh conditions will make long marches difficult. Besides, many young men from the north are serving in our army, and the north must begin its winter preparations. As for the conquest of Dorne, that will be postponed until next spring. As soon as Aegon finished speaking, Lord Torrhen of the North stood first. The northern lords followed in unison, bowing respectfully and calling out, Your Grace is merciful. Aegon nodded slightly, then lowered his hand, motioning for them to sit. He resumed presiding over the war council, organizing a detailed strategy for the coming decisive battle to ensure everything would go flawlessly. A month passed. Two vast armies finally met on the open plains south of the Blackwater Rush, deep within the Reach. When King Mern of House Gardener and King Lauren of House Lannister received the scouting reports detailing the Targaryen army's numbers and deployment, their spirits sank instantly. Despair took hold. Their combined forces were dwarfed by the sheer size of the Targaryen host. They held only a marginal advantage in the number and quality of their knights. The battlefield was wide and flat, an expanse of rolling grasslands and golden wheat, ideal terrain for a heavy cavalry charge. But no amount of open ground could close the massive gap in troop numbers. And worse still, Aegon had 3 terrifying dragons at his command, ready to strike at any moment. Inside the command tent of the King of the Rock and the King of the Reach, King Lauren of the Rock was already wavering. He quietly leaned toward King Mern and muttered under his breath, We're at an obvious disadvantage in this war. What are we supposed to do now? HMPH. King Mern's eyes burned with defiance as he declared, We charge straight into their lines and strike down Aegon in one decisive blow. Once Aegon is dead, the Targaryen army will crumble on its own. Without their master, the dragons won't take orders from anyone else. And what if Aegon is riding a dragon? King Lauren pressed, his brow furrowed, his voice full of worry. How do we deal with that? King Mern was momentarily speechless. He slapped his thigh in frustration and cursed, It's that damned bitch from Dorne's fault. She refused to sell us those dragon-hunting crossbows. Now I don't even know what the hell we're supposed to do. Gentlemen, does anyone have a better plan? King Lauren slowly turned his gaze across the tent, addressing the gathered bannermen. The dozens of lords from the Reach and the Westerlands looked at one another in silence. No one had a workable strategy. Only a few reckless fools shouted foolishly about shooting the dragons down with ordinary arrows. The war council ground to a halt. The command tent fell into absolute silence. By now, almost everyone had come to the grim realization, their carefully constructed alliance had collapsed. The only path that remained seemed to lead toward defeat and subjugation. Time passed in the heavy, stifling quiet of the war tent. At last, the head of House Tarly could no longer bear the self-deceiving, cowardly denial hanging in the air. He drew a deep breath, straightened his back, and shattered the suffocating silence, speaking the truth no one dared voice. Your Grace, my lords, we now have only one path left. All eyes turned toward Lord Tarly. His face was grave as he slowly swept his gaze across the room, then spoke in a low, steady voice. Submit to the Targaryen dynasty. We have no other choice. No. King Mern exploded, his emotions surging. He shot to his feet, slamming his palm onto the table as he roared, I will never end up like that coward Argilac of the Stormlands, handing my crown over to Aegon. I will never let my daughter bear that man's bastards. I would rather die like Heron, burned alive by dragonfire. That is the death a true king deserves. The lords fell silent again, but this time they looked upon King Mern with admiration. King Loren stared at Mern's bold, unshakable figure and couldn't help but feel a twinge of shame. He resented himself for ever having entertained the cowardly thought of surrendering his crown to Aegon. But once the wave of passion subsided and the bitter truth returned, one by one, the lords slowly shifted their gazes away from King Mern, including King Loren. Their eyes were filled with fear. Fear of the unstoppable Targaryen host, surging like a tidal wave. Fear of the Valyrian dragonlords, apocalyptic might. And above all, fear of the death that stalked their every step like a shadow. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon comp BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 72. Wildfire of Wrath. King Mern stretched out his hand, pointing straight at King Loren, and scolded him with frustration. Just look at you now, so downcast and defeated, completely unworthy of the bold spirit you showed when we first forged our alliance. King Loren I of the Rock kept his head bowed, jaw clenched tight, his face so dark and stormy it seemed like rain might fall from it. His right hand gripped his sword so hard that the veins bulged on the back of his hand, clearly visible. He was fighting hard to contain the fury burning in his chest. If not for his usually decent character, he might have drawn his sword right then, beheaded King Mern on the spot, and carried the corpse to Aegon to claim credit and reward. At that moment, Serret, the lord of House Serret and a vassal of the Rock, quickly sensed the tension building in the hall. He stepped forward at once, placing a hand over Loren I's sword-wielding hand, and spoke in a low voice, Your Grace, please, don't act on impulse. Loren I's face remained taut as he gave a slight nod in reply. Mern stepped once more to the center of the hall, spread his arms wide, and addressed the assembled nobles with a hoarse, rallying cry. We must take up arms. Punish these 3 evil dragons and drive the Valyrian raiders from our lands. They are vile invaders. I know the ways of the Valyrian Freehold, they worship slavery. Just look at King's Landing, that den of chains Aegon the evil dragon is building. It's filled with slaves, forced to labor day and night. Aegon is even more terrifying than Heron the Blackheart. If we shrink away like cowards now, our children and their children will live as slaves. Our ancestors will spit on our names. As long as the slightest hope remains, we must not give in. Mern Ix's speech was thunderous, filled with passion and fire, but the response was meager. Only a handful of his sons and loyal bannermen clapped and pumped their fists in support. The rest of the nobles sat silent, the air in the room so heavy it was difficult to breathe. The lords of the Kingdom of the Rock crossed their arms, sneering, as if watching a clown make a fool of himself on stage. Mern Ix, seeing the lack of response, erupted in rage, shaking with fury. He jabbed his finger at his own vassals, eyes wide, shouting, Cowards! You're a coward. You too. Publicly berated by their liege lord, the nobles of the Riverlands were humiliated. Heads bowed, eyes fixed on their own feet, not one of them dared to speak. Watching this unfold, Loren I let out a heavy snort through his nose, then turned and strode out of the council hall with the lords of the Rock following in lockstep. The Reach lords who had already been considering surrender now found themselves stuck. They wanted to follow Loren, but feared punishment from their liege. No one could predict what reckless move the now unhinged Mern Ix might make. Thus, the military council between the Kingdom of the Reach and the Kingdom of the Rock ended in disarray and discontent. After the meeting, many nobles quietly withdrew from the alliance. Some returned straight to their own lands, while others rode directly to the Targaryen camp to surrender. Among them was Loren I of the Rock. He led his vassals and army away from the coalition without hesitation, marching straight to the Targaryen encampment. There, Loren I knelt on one knee and raised high the golden crown that symbolized the legacy of the kings of the Rock. Aegon emerged at the head of the Targaryen dynasty's high officials, majestic and commanding. Under the gaze of tens of thousands, Aegon gladly accepted King Loren's submission, reaching out to take the crown made entirely of gold. On the spot, he appointed Loren as Lord of the Westerlands. Loren Lannister's betrayal of his allies and surrender to the enemy was met with universal scorn throughout Westeros. People gave him a loud and damning nickname, Loren the King Who Knelt. Aegon promptly sent envoys to the Reach's army camp, urging them to surrender as well. He made it clear that he had no desire to slaughter those who would one day become his subjects and citizens. Mernix flew into a rage. Without hesitation, he executed Aegon's envoy, declaring with resolute defiance that he would rather die than surrender. So, the very next day, the two kingdoms' armies faced off on the battlefield, poised for a fierce and imminent clash. This time, unlike at the Battle of the Last Storm, Aegon did not hold the advantage of high ground. The terrain here was firm, dry, and free of any mud or rainfall to influence the fight. But that hardly mattered, the disparity in strength between the two sides was simply too great. Even after the betrayal by the Kingdom of the Rock, King Mern still commanded nearly 40,000 soldiers. As the wealthiest region in all of Westeros, the Reach fielded the most well-equipped army on the continent. With the addition of the 10,000 troops brought by the King of the Rock, the Targaryen army's strength had surged past 100,000. It would be a battle of 40,000 against 100,000. On the day of the decisive battle, the wind stirred, but the sky was a cloudless blue. In fact, not a single drop of rain had fallen in the 2 weeks leading up to the fight. King Mern assigned his eldest son and heir, Edmund, to lead the vanguard. The right wing was commanded by Lord Tarly and his knights, while the left was under the leadership of Lord Oakheart. With no natural barriers guarding the Targaryen flanks, King Mern planned to stretch out both wings to sweep across and strike deep into Aegon's rear camp, hoping to cut down the enemy commander himself. The center of the force would launch a powerful, unstoppable charge, led by the so-called Iron Fists, a massive wedge of noble lords and armored knights. It was a bold and ambitious plan. But reality was far less kind. As the Reach's army began its charge, some soldiers broke ranks and fled the battlefield. Many lords deliberately slowed their pace, each trying to outdo the other in charging more sluggishly. The once cohesive force of 40,000 was quickly reduced to a sluggish, scattered mess. Aegon had arranged his troops in a sharp spearhead formation. Infantry bristling with spears and pikes held the front line, with archers and crossbowmen positioned just behind. Light cavalry covered both flanks. He handed over battlefield command to Orys, while he and his two queens took to the skies. Aegon had naturally noticed that the land hadn't seen rain in many days. The grass was thick, the wheat heavy with grain, and everything was bonedry. At the sound of the command horn, the Targaryen army began to advance in disciplined unison, their banners surging like waves in a sea of color. King Mern, astride a golden warhorse, personally led the central charge. At his side, his son Gon held aloft a banner, a white field bearing a great green hand. Driven on by the blare of horns, the loyal retainers of House Gardener roared and screamed as they charged forward, braving a downpour of arrows. But their momentum was broken as they slammed into the Targaryen spear lines, suffering devastating losses. It was then that Aegon and his sisters made their move. Aegon, mounted on Valyrian, swept through the enemy ranks like a thundercloud, diving again and again through volleys of spears, stones, and arrows, unleashing torrents of flame. Rhaenys and Visenya flanked him in support, setting fire to both the windward and leeward flanks of the enemy. The dry hay and ripened wheat caught fire instantly. Fanned by the wind, the blaze spread rapidly, sending thick smoke rolling across the battlefield, straight into the faces of the advancing soldiers under the Reach's banners. The heat of the flames made the horses restless and uneasy. As the smoke thickened, neither riders nor mounts could see a thing, only the rising walls of fire surrounding them. In an instant, the once mighty cavalry formation collapsed into chaos. The Targaryen army, positioned upwind of the inferno, simply needed to calmly use bows and spears to finish off the stumbling, flame-covered enemies fleeing from the sea of fire. Acrid smoke choked the battlefield. The roar of flames and the screams of dying soldiers mingled into a nightmarish symphony. The battle ended within minutes. In truth, only House Gardener and their closest vassals had joined the actual fight. The other lords of the Reach had lingered at the rear, never stepping onto the battlefield. Once Aegon and his sisters incinerated the charging warriors of House Gardener, the Reach lords dismounted at once, threw down their weapons, and dropped to their knees in surrender. But almost immediately, they saw the raging flames sweeping toward them and were forced to abandon their arms entirely, scrambling to retreat even farther. Their panic made for a pitiful sight. Lord Loren of the Westerlands spat hard, squinting as he watched King Mern turn to a blackened husk in the dragonfire. Relief and dread churned in his chest. If I had let King Mern talk me into fighting the Dragonlord, I'd be roasted too. Aegon ordered Orys to take the surrendered lords of the Reach into custody. Most had dropped their weapons and fled quickly enough, so few were seriously burned by the dragonfire. After the battle, Aegon had the army tally the dead. Over 2,000 had been burned alive, while another 1,000 had fallen to blades, spears, or arrows. Tens of thousands suffered burns, and even among the Targaryens' own men, many were accidentally injured by dragonfire. A number of them would carry hideous scars for the rest of their lives. King Mern IX, along with his sons, brothers, cousins, and extended kin, were reduced to ash. Only one nephew lingered for 3 days before succumbing to his burns. With that, House Gardener was no more. The Targaryen forces had lost fewer than 100 men. Queen Visenya had taken an arrow to the shoulder, but it had only pierced her leather armor and stuck in the cotton padding beneath. It hadn't injured her. As the 3 dragons feasted on the corpses, Aegon sent men to gather up the weapons scattered across the scorched field and transport them to King's Landing. He intended to make a spectacle of the surrendered soldiers, displaying their arms in the city square as proof of his overwhelming victory. The stench of charred flesh filled the air. Smoke billowed thick and black, cloaking the battlefield in a scene straight out of the apocalypse. The terrifying blaze that had consumed the plains earned the battle its name, Field of Fire, as dubbed by the maesters who had accompanied the army. During the following days of rest, Aegon turned his thoughts to the unconquered kingdom of Dorne in the west. He mounted Balerion and flew ahead of the main host, hurrying to Highgarden to prevent anyone else from seizing the opportunity. As Balerion soared above Highgarden, Aegon noticed the castle was on high alert, as though someone had anticipated his arrival on Dragonback. A middle-aged man in a steward's uniform stood waiting atop the city walls. He raised a hand to stop the guards, who were poised for battle. The steward introduced himself as Harlan Tyrell, head of House Tyrell and the one who had sent several secret letters to the Targaryen dynasty. He explained that House Tyrell now controlled all of Highgarden. Harlan Tyrell declared that if Aegon would grant House Tyrell the title of Lord of Highgarden and the Reach, the Tyrells would kneel and swear fealty to him. Aegon, seated atop his dragon, regarded him with a hint of amusement. Perhaps Harlan Tyrell still doesn't know that the army of the Reach has already been defeated, and House Gardener wiped out by the Targaryens. And now he thinks he can bargain Highgarden for a noble title. Aegon stared down coldly from the dragon's back, his expression unreadable. Foolish steward, he said flatly, why would you ask me for payment for something that already belongs to me? If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon comp BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 4 comments 0 vote. Chapter 73. Only the Valyrian steel and name cannot be borrowed. Harlan's thoughts raced, but on the surface, he bowed deeply, full of deference and apology, the very picture of a proper butler. Congratulations to your Grace Aegon on your triumphant victory at the Battle of the Fields, Harlan said respectfully. Aegon, seated atop Balerion, looked down at him with a cold, expressionless gaze. You're clever, he said coolly, but clever men rarely live long. Your Grace Aegon, I have always been wholeheartedly loyal to your rule. When Mern Ix summoned his vassals to wage war against you, I, though serving as his close advisor and butler, withstood immense pressure and refused to raise troops. Does that not prove my loyalty? Harlan said earnestly, with a touch of grievance on his face. Enough. Your glib tongue has spared you punishment for your earlier offense, Aegon said lightly. Tyrell seeks no reward for any merit, only to serve the Targaryen dynasty with devotion. I have heard of your Grace's famed mercy. Since you've shown such mercy to the north, I humbly ask that you extend a measure of it to House Tyrell as well. Your Grace, please enter. This is your castle, how could I dare take precedence over you? Harlan said humbly. He gestured for his household guards to open the castle gates and respectfully invited Aegon to enter, though Aegon had no need to use Highgarden's gates to enter the castle. To dispel any potential suspicion Aegon might harbor, Harlan decisively waved his hand, signaling all soldiers on the walls and within the city to withdraw. Maintaining a respectful expression, he jogged ahead, guiding the massive Balerion to land slowly within the botanical gardens. As Aegon prepared to dismount, Harlan immediately stepped forward, dropped to both knees, and prostrated himself on the ground, offering his back as a foothold to help Aegon dismount smoothly. Your Grace, you have traveled far. Please, come rest for a moment in the pavilion, Harlan said humbly, turning slightly, bowing, and extending his hand in invitation. Aegon gave a small nod and walked forward, with Harlan closely following behind. Inside the pavilion, Harlan hurried to the stone table, deftly picked up the teapot, gently lifted it, and slowly poured tea into a delicate cup. Holding the teacup with both hands, he carefully offered it to Aegon. Your Grace, please enjoy some tea. To prove his loyalty, Harlan picked up another cup, took a small sip, then set it down and respectfully said, the tea is safe, Your Grace. Please drink with confidence. Aegon picked up his cup, his gaze falling on Harlan. You're far too fawning, it's rather affected. Harlan stood with his feet together, like a scolded schoolboy, quietly enduring Aegon's reprimand. Aegon took a slow sip and said, when Mernix summoned his vassals to arms, you chose to defy his orders and refrained from raising troops against the Targaryen dynasty. That was, indeed, an act of submission. Harlan bowed slightly, his tone earnest as he pleaded again, please allow me to restate my position. House Tyrell has always been your Grace's most loyal follower, ever eager to serve the Targaryen dynasty. I humbly implore your Grace to grant me the title of Lord of Highgarden, so that I may dedicate myself fully to your service. Aegon frowned slightly, his gaze scrutinizing as he said with displeasure, I do not grant titles to those without merit, especially not to one suspected of betrayal. I have no interest in placing schemers among the kingdom's chief officials. Becoming a minor noble of no consequence is already a stable arrangement for your house. I'm offering this advice as a gesture of goodwill, in light of your diligent service. Your Grace, if you do not grant me the title, then whom do you intend to give Highgarden to? House Hightower is far stronger than House Tyrell. If Highgarden is given to them, they will control the Riverlands, Aldtown, the Citadel, and the headquarters of the Faith of the Seven. Such a concentration of power would do nothing to benefit your Grace's reign, Harlan said urgently, trying to persuade Aegon. Aegon shook his head lightly, his tone firm and final. I won't repeat myself. I do not reward those without merit, and House Hightower is no exception. I haven't troubled them, and they should count it a blessing from the Seven. Harlan's thoughts raced as he mulled over Aegon's words. After a moment's pause, he asked, testing the waters, is it possible that your Grace intends to place Highgarden directly under the Crownlands? Your house is indeed quite suited to the role of steward, you're remarkably good at reading your master's mind, Aegon said, reclining lazily in his chair, the corner of his mouth lifting into a faint, unreadable smile. Your Grace hasn't appointed any lords in the Riverlands either, so it wasn't hard to guess, Harlan said with a careful smile. Aegon said nothing, merely half-closing his eyes as he leaned back, lost in thought over the Targaryen dynasty's next moves. But such an approach might stir dissatisfaction among the great lords. With too much power concentrated in the royal family, it's only natural for many lords to harbor doubts. That could threaten the kingdom's stability, Harlan said cautiously, then quickly added, Your Grace, I do not question your decision, I only hope to highlight possible concerns. Aegon slowly crossed his arms, his tone turning sharp. Do I need your reminders? Are these issues so profound that no ordinary man could think of them? Startled by the sudden rebuke, Harlan's legs gave way, and he dropped to the ground in panic. Your Grace, forgive me. I overstepped. Please forgive me. Aegon did not immediately bid him rise. Instead, he fell silent, deep in thought. As the founding monarch, it was easy enough for him to suppress the great lords with his personal authority. Their current dissatisfaction posed no real threat. But would his descendants possess that same strength of will? If the balance between the crown and the great houses ever faltered, conflict, whether by choice or necessity, would be hard to avoid. His ultimate task was to preserve his bloodline. But if civil war broke out, would his house face the risk of destruction? Aegon's fingers unconsciously tapped the tabletop as he weighed every angle in his mind. Harlan remained kneeling, not daring to lift his head or make a sound, quietly awaiting Aegon's forgiveness. After a long silence, Aegon chose to let the matter rest, for now. He was no saint. He couldn't erase every hidden threat. If House Targaryen ever did clash with the great lords, then they would have to rely on their own strength to face it. And besides, he was still young. Perhaps, in time, he would find a solution. Get up. In light of your earlier decision not to send troops, House Tyrell may continue to serve as stewards of Highgarden, Aegon said with a wave of his hand, his tone calm. Thank you, Your Grace, Harlan said gratefully. He showed no hint of the disappointment he felt inside. After serving King Mern for so many years, he had long since learned how to conceal his true emotions. Aegon said nothing further. In truth, he was still weighing the matter of rewards in the reach, no decision had yet been made. House Hightower wielded considerable influence and would need a loyal force to counterbalance it. Harlan had only just surrendered, his loyalty was still uncertain, and not yet enough to earn Aegon's full trust. House Baratheon, on the other hand, seemed a more suitable choice. Aegon had originally planned to grant Orys lands in Dorne. Given Orys's forceful nature, sending him to subdue the unruly Dornish would be a fitting assignment. Just then, the sudden beat of dragon wings tore through the quiet sky above. Aegon looked up. 2 dragons were descending, Vhagar and Meryxes. As they landed in the botanical gardens, they stirred up a fierce gust of wind that sent flowers and trees swaying wildly. With the dragons came Queens Visenya and Rhaenys. Visenya stood tall and imposing, while Rhaenys moved with light, graceful steps, a gentle smile on her beautiful face. Aegon rose to greet the 2 sisters, opening his arms to embrace them. Perhaps they would have useful advice to offer. Inside the white wooden pavilion, Aegon shared his concern with them. Highgarden is not like Harrenhal. It has served as the capital of the Reach since the Age of Heroes. If it remains without a lord for too long, the other Reach lords will grow covetous, it could lead to unrest. Visenya responded in a steady voice, the Lord of the Reach cannot be a noble from outside the region. Back in the Age of Heroes, the demigod Garth Greenhand was known for his romantic nature and many children. His bloodline has become the foundation of the Reach's nobility. If Highgarden's lord lacks Greenhand blood, conflict within the Reach will persist. Aegon nodded thoughtfully. I hadn't considered that. Rhaenys, smiling sweetly, peeled a crystal-clear grape with her slender fingers and gently placed it in Aegon's mouth. Though she lacked political acumen, her tender care for Aegon was meticulous and constant. After a brief moment of contemplation, Visenya offered her suggestion. In my view, the title of Lord of the Reach should be granted to another of Greenhand descent, while Highgarden itself is placed directly under royal control. That way, we reduce the Reach's excessive strength and quickly stabilize its political climate. That's a sound plan, Aegon said, his eyes lighting up with approval. He leaned forward and kissed Visenya with delight. You truly are my most trusted advisor, brilliant as ever. Visenya shrank her shoulders slightly but didn't manage to avoid the kiss. She had never liked displaying too much affection in front of others, not even in front of her sister, Rhaenys. Aegon and the 2 queens took residence in the Rose Garden of the royal palace at Highgarden. With Balerion and the other 2 dragons by their side, there was no need to worry about security. All food was first tested for poison, and so they waited patiently for 2 days. The Targaryen vanguard, led by Orys, arrived at Highgarden at full speed without pause. Orys immediately began his work, systematically taking over the castle's defenses with soldiers loyal to the crown. The troops of House Tyrell were swiftly expelled from the stronghold. Once Highgarden was firmly under control, Aegon sent a letter to Maester Gawain, instructing him to summon the High Septon of the Faith of the Seven to Highgarden. He had not forgotten the task of dismantling the Faith's military power. Fortunately, Aegon now held overwhelming strength. Otherwise, he might have been forced to travel to the Starry Sept in Aldtown to accept coronation from the High Septon. Only a rightful ruler should wear the crown, never a puppet of the clergy. If Aegon's sovereignty were truly granted by the Church, future kings of House Targaryen would inevitably see their authority undermined by the faith. While waiting for the main Targaryen host to arrive, Harlan took on the role of guide for Aegon and the 2 queens, leading them through a tour of Highgarden Castle. For security, Orys had arranged multiple layers of guards throughout the area. The Reach had only recently submitted, and its people were not yet fully at ease. Some still clung to memories of their former kingdom and might even entertain thoughts of assassinating Aegon. He had already survived several assassination attempts in newly subdued Storm's End. After all, he had destroyed their homeland. Many in the 7 kingdoms, particularly the elderly who had made peace with death, couldn't accept that loss. Some were even willing to die with their kingdom, taking the path of vengeance. My lord, this way please, Harlan said respectfully, offering a graceful gesture to lead them on. Let's go. Aegon nodded slightly and moved forward, an arm around each of the queens. Along the way, they passed several maids. They wore Highgarden's signature long green dresses. Though their chests and backs remained covered, the slits in their skirts reached nearly to the tops of their thighs. From the side, Aegon caught glimpses of their long, slender legs flashing between the fabric, unmistakably seductive in their simplicity. So the rumors were true. Highgarden is indeed known for its openness, Aegon mused silently. The two queens noticed his sidelong glances but paid them little mind. They were long accustomed to his roving eye. After all, the Valyrian Dragonlord was in his prime, bold and unrestrained by nature. Highgarden is protected by 3 white walls. Your Grace and the queens are currently staying in the innermost part, the 100-flower courtyard, Harlan explained as they walked. Just beyond it lies the plant maze, enclosed by the second white wall. The maze is used for entertaining guests and leisurely strolls, but it also serves a defensive function. Intruders unfamiliar with it will quickly lose their way, either running into dead ends or falling victim to the traps within. After a short walk, the group left the courtyard-style buildings and entered a lush garden. The surroundings were a tapestry of blooming flowers and dense trees. Winding paths and gravel walkways meandered through the space, alongside elegant fountains and detailed sculptures. Rhaenys was thoroughly enchanted by Highgarden. With her deep love for the arts, especially poetry and music, the castle's architecture and cultural elegance suited her perfectly. Visenya, by contrast, found little interest in the setting. Her mind remained fixed on matters of war and statecraft. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. Chapter 74, Highgarden, My Private Garden. The botanical garden stretched endlessly. Aegon wandered through it, gradually growing bored, though Rhaenys remained full of energy, clearly enjoying herself and not yet ready to leave. Leading the way ahead, Harlan quickly noticed his sovereign's lack of interest and restlessness. Sensing the moment, he summoned 2 noblewomen from House Tyrell and instructed them to accompany the 2 queens through the plant maze for some rest and leisure. He also told them to gather a few Highgarden ladies to host a tea party for the queens. Aegon observed Harlan's arrangements without objection, silently thinking, Harlan's probably looking to send the queens off so he can offer me something in private. After leading Aegon out of the maze, Harlan bowed and said respectfully, Your Grace, if you wish to experience the true spirit of Highgarden, there is a place you must see for yourself. Oh, let's hear it, where is this place? Aegon replied with a smile, already guessing what kind of place Harlan had in mind. Flower Street. The 700-meter one, Harlan said, smiling. Aegon smirked, playing along. What, a flower market set up by the 7? Ha. Harlan just smiled and bowed deeply without answering. Let's go, Aegon said with a wave of his hand. This sort of place, naturally, was outside the white walls of Highgarden proper. It was located in a nearby area known as the Natural Market, which housed most of Highgarden's population, said to number over 100,000 at its peak. When Aegon and Orys reached the street, they found it bustling even in broad daylight. Women wore short-sleeved silk tops, while those from poorer households wore linen. At the slightest sweat, their clothes clung to their skin, leaving little to the imagination. Harlan led Aegon deeper down the street. Along the way, women cast flirtatious glances, and young girls stole shy peeks at the richly dressed Dragonlord. Some tried to approach, but Orys stepped in coldly to block them. Aegon didn't do anything foolish like asking Orys to let them through. After all, Highgarden hadn't fully settled under his rule yet, especially not in a place teeming with all sorts. Caution was the wiser path. These women, whether cultivated or wild, were offering taxable services. Their trade is protected by Highgarden law and provides a portion of the city's tax revenue, Harlan explained. There are 1,000 lords in Westeros with 1,000 different laws. This chaos must end, Aegon said with a sigh. A true kingdom should have one script, one system of roads, one tax code, and one body of law. Harlan quickly chimed in with praise. Your Grace possesses unmatched wisdom, a grand vision, and a noble ambition. Only under your guidance can the people of Westeros enjoy true prosperity. Aegon smiled faintly. Though he enjoyed the flattery, he still scolded, You're certainly smooth with words, but a little too rehearsed, too eager to please. With my clumsy tongue, I can never hope to capture your Grace's greatness, Harlan replied with a sycophantic smile. He stopped walking and pointed to a 3-story pavilion beside the street. We've arrived, Your Grace. The dance hall is called Sweet Rose. Aegon examined the building, its exterior adorned with climbing rose vines, though sadly, it was not the blooming season. He turned to Harlan and asked, This street stretches nearly a kilometer and holds hundreds of dance halls. Why bring me to this one in particular? Harlan's expression lit up as he explained, because the madam of this hall was once a lover of Mern IX. The last blood of House Gardener is being carefully nurtured here. The girl, a bastard, has yet to marry. She is a gift I've specially prepared for your Grace. Her beauty and figure will not disappoint. Oh. Aegon looked at Harlan with dawning understanding. You certainly know how to curry favor, and you've got a sharp mind, clever enough to guess my tastes. If I were to grant the reach to House Tyrell, perhaps your family might truly hold onto that seat. Hearing Aegon mention a possible grant of the reach, Harlan was thrilled, though he kept his composure and answered solemnly, everything I do is for your grace and for the Targaryen dynasty. All the wit and cunning of House Tyrell belongs to you and to the realm. Aegon chuckled, shaking his head. Very well, I'll count this as a small merit. With that, he laughed softly and strode into the building. Guided by Harlan, he made his way straight to the rear garden. A soft harp melody drifted through the air, faint and graceful, evoking a sense of peace and ease. Roses were planted throughout the garden, tightly encircling a clear, still pool like a green silk scarf, lending a delicate beauty to the courtyard. In a small pavilion by the water, a maiden sat gently plucking the harp strings. Harlan knew better than to linger and quietly excused himself. Aegon had Orys carefully inspect the area, checking for hidden weapons or potential threats. Only after receiving Orys's confirmation that all was safe did Aegon begin walking toward the girl in the pavilion. In the soft glow of surrounding torches, her skin seemed to shimmer faintly, giving her a mysterious and alluring presence. Aegon stepped closer, stopping beside her as he studied her carefully. The girl had long, dark green hair and a graceful, well-proportioned figure, slim waist, full chest, the ideal form of youthful beauty. Her presence was pure, yet subtly alluring. She seemed a little tense, her fingers stiff across the harp strings. The melody faltered, the rhythm disrupted by the presence of the unexpected guest. She looks a bit like that Polaris girl who used to pop up online in my past life, same hair color. And what a face, brows like distant hills, eyes deep as autumn waters, a delicate nose, lips like cherries, Aegon thought privately. What may I call you, my lady? Aegon asked gently. The girl stood from her harp, gave a slight curtsy, and answered in a clear, sweet voice, my name is Rhaedel, Rhaedel Flowers, your grace. Aegon reached out to touch her hair. Rhaedel instinctively flinched, but forced herself to stay still. She held her posture, subtly pushing her chest forward. The rise and fall of her breathing betrayed just how nervous she was. Aegon gently twirled a strand of her hair between his fingers, speaking slowly. You remind me of someone I once knew. She had green hair as well, though hers was more ashen, while yours leans darker, like black-green. He activated the chip to assess Rhaedel's innate ability. Crank, Greenhand bloodline, Gardener, Nature affinity plus 100%, Fertility plus 200%. You have a chance to form a spiritual contract with a compatible plant. Your vitality and spiritual energy will be shared with it. Watering, fertilizing, and pruning your plant partner will affect its growth traits and special effects. Spiritual energy plus 10. Aegon was slightly surprised. He hadn't expected the bastard daughter of Mern Ix to possess a crank talent. Was the blood of the demigod's eldest son truly this potent? He remembered Ilya's talent had initially been Drank, Greenhand bloodline, maiden, only later advancing to Crank for reasons still unclear. This Crank, Greenhand bloodline, Gardener, was somewhat akin to the Valyrian dragonlords, contracts with their dragons, though with an even lower success rate. The world was filled with plants, yet for those with the Gardener bloodline, finding a truly compatible partner might be exceedingly rare. Given Mern Ix's arrogance, perhaps he had already succeeded in forming such a bond, but now that House Gardener had been wiped out, there was no way for Aegon to uncover the secrets of the Greenhand's eldest son. Rhaedel bit her lip, her delicate frame trembling as Aegon's touch grew bolder. That old friend of yours must have meant a great deal, enough for you to think of her even when you're with me, she said softly, summoning her courage. Her eyes locked with his as she gently wrapped her arms around his neck and offered a kiss of her own accord. My king, don't think of anyone else tonight, please. I belong to you, and you, only to me. Aegon nodded with a faint smile and raised his hand, giving a soft wave to signal Orys to withdraw and keep watch outside the courtyard. The next day, Aegon quietly instructed Harlan to have Rhaedel discreetly relocated to the flower courtyard within the royal palace of Highgarden. As for himself, he followed his usual routine, visiting the courtyard of his two queens to tend to Visenya and Rhaenys. Though the sisters didn't mind his occasional indulgences, Aegon knew better than to neglect his wives for the sake of a mistress. Another 10 delightful days passed in Highgarden. Harlan, ever the shrewd and obsequious advisor, proved especially skilled at catering to Aegon's tastes. He introduced him to everything Highgarden had to offer, whether it was proper or not. If not for his unshakable ambition to conquer and rule, Aegon might well have lost himself in Highgarden's charms and never left. By now, the full might of the Targaryen host had arrived, 120,000 strong, encamped on the plains near the natural market, a sight that left the people of the Reach utterly stunned. Arriving alongside them was House Hightower from Aldtown. Yet what drew Aegon's attention most was the continued absence of the High Septon and the leading Septons of the Faith of the Seven. His patience began to wear thin. The Targaryens held a grand ceremony of allegiance at the Oak King's Hall, deep within the center of the plant maze. There, in Highgarden's most solemn and sacred place, all the Reach lords who had surrendered after the Battle of the Field of Fire, along with the Westerlands lords who had submitted in advance, would swear fealty to Aegon. At the heart of the maze stood 7 ancient oak trees. Their bark was deeply furrowed, as if engraved by the passage of time. These 7 oaks encircled a vast platform, the old council hall once built by House Gardener, firstborn line of the Greenhand, during the Age of Heroes. Aegon and his advisors stepped onto the platform nestled among the trees. The green stone tiles beneath their feet remained firm and level despite their age. Ancient records tell us that during the Age of Heroes, the canopies of the 7 millennia-old oaks once intertwined, forming a natural dome overhead. Countless branches stretched outward and upward, creating layered green walls. But with the ebbing of the world's magical tides, the oakleaf dome is no longer as complete as it once was, Harlan explained respectfully from behind, recounting the hall's history. Aegon gave a slight nod, intrigued by the fact that such a relic from the Age of Heroes still stood in Highgarden. After the ceremony, he resolved to touch the trees himself and use the chip to probe whether any secrets remained hidden in these ancient oaks. He walked steadily to the platform's center, ascended the steps, and climbed onto the raised dais crafted from solid oak. Whoosh! With a sharp motion, Aegon flung his cloak behind him and sat firmly upon the throne, his gaze cold as he looked down on the gathered lords. Hundreds of ministers bowed in perfect unison, their voices ringing out together. King Aegon, Your Grace. Today, Lady Rhaedel served as the master of ceremonies. She stepped lightly from the side of the throne to the front of the platform and called out in a clear, resonant voice. Lords of the Westerlands, step forward to swear fealty to His Grace Aegon I, Supreme King of Westeros. Loren advanced at the head of his vassals, his expression grave. They knelt reverently at the foot of the dais, placing their weapons before them as they began to chant their oaths of allegiance in unison. Aegon rose slowly from his seat and paced to the front. Rhaedel offered him a respectful curtsy, then quietly stepped behind him. In light of your decision to raise arms against the royal host, though your rebellion caused no serious harm to the realm, you must still face some measure of punishment. From this day forth, House Lefford of Golden Tooth shall fall under the jurisdiction of the Crownlands. Lord Loren, do you accept this judgment? Aegon's voice was steady and firm as he stared directly at Loren. The lords of the Reach, who had also surrendered, watched with thinly veiled glee as the Westerlands suffered their comeuppance. They, at least, had held out until their liege perished. In their minds, they were not like the dishonorable turncoats from the West. Under pressure, Loren Lannister didn't hesitate. Once again, he lowered his noble head to Aegon and declared loudly, Your Grace, I accept the punishment willingly. Thank you for your mercy and generosity. But inside, Loren was bleeding. Golden Tooth was home to a major gold mine. House Lefford had merely been overseeing the site on behalf of House Lannister. Now that the Lannisters had lost this vital source of wealth, both their power and influence had taken a major blow. Aegon nodded, satisfied. Golden Tooth wasn't just valuable for its resources, it was also a strategic fortress, the gateway into the Westerlands. Controlling it meant the Targaryen crown could strike westward at any time, even lay siege to Castle Rock if necessary. Once he returned to King's Landing, Aegon planned to mint coinage, currency unique to House Targaryen, the Golden Dragon. Owning a gold mine would make that all the more feasible. He raised his hand slightly, signaling the Westerlands lords to rise, then turned and returned to his seat upon the oak throne. Now came the real event, the allegiance and investiture of the Reach lords. Aegon already had a grand plan in motion, all he needed now was for the lords of the Reach to take the bait. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon comp BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 75. I ushered in the Age of Conquest. Lady Rhaedel, the master of ceremonies, stood beside Aegon. She lifted her chin slightly and gathered her strength once more to call out loudly to the crowd below, Lords of the South, step forward and swear your loyalty to your grace Aegon I, the Supreme King of Westeros. Among the Reach nobles, Tyrell frowned slightly as he watched Rhaedel, the last scion of House Gardener. He sensed Aegon's clear regard for her and felt that she might pose a subtle threat to his position as Highgarden's steward. The southern lords stepped forward and knelt before Aegon. As their knees struck the ground, a heavy thud echoed through the hall. In perfect unison, they presented their weapons with both hands. Aegon instructed Visenya to collect the swords of the surrendered lords, then continued the oath-taking ceremony. Once the vows were completed, all eyes turned expectantly toward Aegon. With the title of Lord of the Reach now vacant and Highgarden without a ruler, the lords descended from the Greenhand bloodline were certain that one of them stood the best chance of being granted the southern lordship. Aegon maintained a solemn expression as he looked down at the defeated lords of the Reach. While touring Highgarden with Harlan, he had quietly observed and assessed the strength and influence of the region's noble houses. In his mind, Aegon had divided the Reach's noble strength into 3 distinct tiers. T0 tier, House Peak, House Hightower, and House Redwyn of Greenwall. In Aegon's evaluation, these houses showed no obvious shortcomings, militarily, politically, or financially. T1 tier, House Tarly of Horn Hill, House Sari of the Shield Islands, House Tyrell, and the houses founded by the sons of Greenhand, Garth. These houses might be strong in certain areas, but they had one or more weaknesses and relied on T0 tier families or the regional liege lord to survive steadily. T2 and below, lesser noble holdings and knightly houses. Aegon realized this system of classification could just as easily apply to the other great domains of Westeros. Lords, Aegon said calmly. He raised his hand slightly, pausing just long enough for the once noisy crowd to fall completely silent. All eyes turned to him. Inside the Oak King's Hall, the assembled lords held their breath, not daring to miss a word. Each of them was secretly wondering who would be granted the crucial title of Lord of the South. Suddenly, clang! Aegon unsheathed the Valyrian steel sword Blackfire. With both hands crossed over the hilt, he stood tall, the long sword planted firmly before him on the platform above the throne. I am angry. I am furious. Aegon's voice rose sharply, flames of rage burning in his eyes. He lowered his head slightly, casting a commanding gaze down at the kneeling lords of the Reach. His voice thundered. You dared to resist the royal army of House Targaryen. That is an unforgivable crime. At these words, the lords of the Reach felt their throats go dry. It wasn't just the accusation, it was the oppressive force of Aegon's presence as the founding king. His dominance was overwhelming and fearsome. House Tyrell's leader, Harlan, and House Hightower's lord, Manfred, dipped their heads slightly. While others were distracted, they exchanged a quick glance. A faint, nearly imperceptible gleam of satisfaction flickered in their eyes. After all, their 2 houses had not joined House Gardener in defying Aegon's forces. The Stormlands and the North also raised armies against the royal forces. Please forgive us as you have forgiven the other 2 regions, Your Grace, the head of House Peak pleaded loudly, his voice trembling with unease. House Peak's main bloodline had been wiped out in the Field of Fire. The current lord was only the former head's cousin. As loyal allies of Mern Ix, the Peaks now found themselves in a dire position, clinging to the hope of Aegon's mercy. Yes, please treat us as fairly as the North and Stormlands, and grant us your mercy, Your Grace, a southern noble dared to add. Bang! Aegon struck Blackfire hard against the floor. The deep, thunderous sound echoed through the hall like a peal of lightning. The lords who had hoped to reason with him flinched, silenced in an instant. No one dared to breathe. Every eye returned, wide and focused, on the king. My mercy is reserved for those who have served the Targaryen dynasty with merit, Aegon declared, his expression stern, voice calm yet forceful. You ask for fairness. Then let me tell you why I forgave the North and the Stormlands. Before I set foot in Westeros, he continued, raising his voice and sweeping his sharp gaze across the lords below, the North and the Stormlands committed large forces to help the Targaryen royal family conquer the powerful kingdom of Volantis. That was a true contribution. Their territories had both merit and fault, which balanced out, thus, they were spared punishment. And you? What deeds have you done in service to the Targaryen dynasty? Aegon's tone turned sharply accusatory. A cold sweat broke out on the foreheads of the assembled lords. I will tell you a law of the Targaryen dynasty: no title without merit, no lordship without service. Those with merit will be rewarded, those with fault will be punished. This is an iron rule. Aegon's voice rang out, firm and clear. Lord Loren of the Westerlands repented in time and did not take up arms against the royal army. Even so, he was still punished. And yet you lords of the south expect to escape all consequence, and even dream of being granted titles. On what grounds? Would that be fair to Lord Lauren? The lords of the Reach knelt on the ground like wilted eggplants, unable to utter a word under Aegon's scolding. Lord Lauren's lips curled ever so slightly in satisfaction. Fools! Just moments ago, they were mocking me. Now it's their turn to suffer. His confidence in his decision to surrender before battle only grew stronger. At the same time, Lauren was beginning to see clearly. This Aegon of the Targaryen dynasty ruled with an iron hand, and it seemed he intended to centralize power across Westeros. It was unlikely he would willingly relinquish a rich stronghold like Highgarden. Lady Argilla kept her eyes lowered, deep in thought. She hadn't expected Aegon to turn the Stormlands into a land of merit so suddenly and cleverly. She glanced up at him quietly, admiration flashing across her face. Her lover's mind was sharper than she'd imagined. At that moment, Lord Manfred of House Hightower raised his head and addressed Aegon loudly, "Your Grace, House Hightower never resisted your royal army. When you summoned us to Highgarden, I arrived promptly and obeyed your orders without hesitation. I wonder if that counts as meritorious service." "House Tyrell as well," added Harlan, quickly lifting his head and speaking respectfully. "I helped clear out the remnants of Mern Ix from Highgarden for you. We have done no wrong. I ask your grace to judge fairly." Aegon gave both men a slight nod, then raised his hand and declared in a powerful voice, "I have said before, the Targaryen dynasty rewards loyalty and punishes rebellion. Since you have rendered service, I will grant you Castle Dunstanbury and Castle Whitegrove. These two castles belong to the rebellious House Peak, and have now been stripped from them as punishment. Tell me, does this not seem just? House Peak had once been a first-tier powerhouse under the rule of the Gardener kings in the Reach. They held 3 castles, and their lord had served as a close advisor to the King of the Reach, wielding immense influence in the region. Now, with Aegon's ruling, they were effectively demoted. Losing 2 of their 3 castles, House Peak was left with only Starpike. The new head of House Peak, not from the main line, had yet to secure his position. He was in desperate need of recognition from Aegon to suppress the rival factions within his former fief. Though filled with resentment, the situation left him no choice. He stepped forward and bowed first, saying, "Your Grace's judgment is fair." House Peak submits gratefully. Lord Manfred of House Hightower frowned slightly, feeling disappointed. He had hoped to compete for the title of Lord of the Reach. His house already held multiple castles, so gaining Castle Dunstanbury wouldn't provide any major advantage. Just then, Harlan of House Tyrell stepped forward to thank Aegon for the reward. House Tyrell, which had previously held only a few minor and obscure holdings, now had a significant castle added to their domain. Their strength had increased markedly, just enough to touch the edge of the T0 tier. Seeing Harlan, who had contributed just as much as he had, readily accept the reward, Manfred had no choice but to follow suit and offer his thanks for Aegon's generosity. Aegon then formally announced the penalties for the Lords of the Reach. Overall, the punishments were not harsh, mostly slight increases in taxes, which were well within the means of the nobility. With this, the tension in the hall eased, and the lords felt a weight lift from their hearts. Aegon's most severe measures were reserved for the close confidants of Mern Ix. These nobles, many of whom had served in the Greenhand Knights under House Gardener, had been staunch loyalists of the Reach Kingdom. Without exception, they were struck hard and had their power drastically reduced. House Peak was a prime example. With the rewards and punishments settled, Aegon waved his hand, signaling the southern lords to rise and ordering all vassals to stand before the steps of the oaken seat. His face was solemn, and he spoke in a grave tone, "I know many of you are wondering why I have yet to appoint a Lord of the Reach, am I right?" Below, the southern lords nodded repeatedly, like chickens pecking grain. Aegon continued, "As I've said before, the Targaryen dynasty is strict in its management of noble titles. No title shall be granted without merit. Even when you great lords grant titles to the nobles under your rule, I hope you will show restraint." The lords of the north and the Stormlands nodded in agreement. Aegon turned back to face the southern lords and declared, "You have achieved nothing, so how could I grant you a ducal title? The answer is simple. Earn it on the battlefield. I am called the Conqueror in Westeros, and the Targaryen dynasty has a grand plan for conquest. At present, 2 regions remain outside our control, Dorne and the Iron Islands. Just 2 days ago, I received a letter from Dorne refusing to submit. I will issue the decree of conquest granting the Targaryen dynasty the right to subjugate rebellious nobles. Those who hold this decree and conquer the lands of Dorne and the Iron Islands will be recognized by the Targaryen dynasty as the rightful lords of the castles they seize. The kingdom will endorse your newly claimed fiefs and guarantee their sanctity and inviolability. The great lords present remained composed. Their own domains were already vast, and they showed little enthusiasm for the new policy. But hundreds of minor nobles could hardly contain their excitement. They swarmed to the foot of the platform, eagerly crowding around Aegon, desperate to confirm the truth of what they'd just heard. One minor noble, his voice trembling with excitement, asked with shining eyes, "Your Grace. Is it true?" Aegon looked down at the excited crowd with a gentle smile and gave a slight nod in response. The noble who received the nod was overjoyed. He rushed to the platform and reverently kissed the tip of Aegon's boot. After thousands of years, their house finally had a chance to expand. How could they not be thrilled? Manfred, the head of House Hightower, bowed his head slightly, deep in thought, and muttered to himself, "A conquest order. A conquest order. Your Grace, does the title of Lord of the Reach have something to do with the conquest order?" Harlan, quick-witted as ever, instantly saw through the implications and asked urgently. Aegon nodded at Harlan with a smile, clearly pleased with his insight. Under the eager gaze of the Reach's assembled lords, Aegon addressed them slowly. "I will have the deeds of the Reach's nobles in the conquests of Dorne and the Iron Islands recorded in detail. Dorne and the Iron Islands are two vast and vital regions on the continent of Westeros. Once they are fully conquered, the two nobles with the most outstanding achievements will be granted their original lands in the Reach, along with the new territories they seize in Dorne and the Iron Islands. These combined holdings will be substantial enough to form two great ducal domains. When that time comes, those two houses will be honored with the title Lord Paramount of the Reach, serving the kingdom by governing and defending the Reach, along with parts of Dorne and the Iron Islands. Two great domains. Torrhen exclaimed, unable to contain his shock. His eyes were wide with amazement. The nobles of the Vale nodded in agreement. The Reach is already rich and vast. Add in the new lands conquered from Dorne and the Iron Islands, and there's certainly enough to establish two dukedoms. Can the Stormlands also take part in this grand conquest and apply for a conquest order? Lady Argilla asked loudly, prompted by her Stormlands bannerman, speaking on behalf of her region's nobles. Aegon turned to her and calmly explained, all nobles loyal to the Targaryen king are eligible to apply to me for a conquest order. However, only nobles originally from the Reach may compete for the title Lord Paramount of the Reach. This is a special favor I am granting to the Reach. After all, no one wants to see their ancestral homeland, where they've lived for thousands of years, ruled by an outsider. Your Grace is merciful, the Reach lords said in unison, voicing their gratitude. Well said, Your Grace. Manfred of House Hightower exclaimed with a broad smile. In his heart, he was certain that no house in the Reach could rival his own, and one of those ducal titles was as good as his. Wise words from Your Grace, echoed the mid and low-ranking nobles, their praises flowing without end. With a wise king like Your Grace, the kingdom is sure to flourish. One noble said earnestly, full of admiration. Aegon looked on with satisfaction at the awestruck faces of the nobles, thinking to himself how easily their loyalty could be won. Then he raised his voice. The future of the Targaryen dynasty is not confined to the continent of Westeros. So long as your banner can be firmly planted on lands beyond the kingdom, the Targaryen dynasty will recognize your legitimacy. Aegon pointed his blackfire sword skyward, its blade angled high, and proclaimed in a thunderous voice. Do you want my reward? If you want it, I can grant it to you. Then go, conquer. This is the age of conquest that I, Aegon the Conqueror, now begin for you. Hundreds of nobles raised their fists and shouted in unison, voices full of passion. Long live King Aegon I! Long live the great conquest! Loren stared blankly at Aegon, stunned. He had never imagined that this Valyrian dragonlord harbored such boundless ambition. Could it be that Aegon truly intended to mirror the grand ambitions of the Valyrian Freehold and attempt to conquer the entire world? I swear my undying loyalty to King Aegon the Conqueror. May the Seven bless King Aegon. King Aegon, my sword is yours and yours alone. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 76, The Royal Morality Exemption Pact. Unlike the frenzied lesser and mid-ranking nobles, the three lords and several major liege lords were quietly contemplating what the issuance of the conquest law might mean for their families and their authority. In Westeros, noble society is structured like a pyramid, built on the foundations of feudal loyalty and protection. Aegon's conquest law had undoubtedly struck at the heart of the great lord's power. There's an old saying from the Middle Ages, "My vassal's vassal is not my vassal." Now that this law had been enacted, the Targaryen dynasty could bypass the High Lords and directly reward minor nobles based on their military achievements. This posed a real threat to the power balance within the lords' own territories and, in more serious cases, could even undermine the authority of the liege lords themselves. If not for Aegon's commanding presence, his 3 dragons, and the firm support of Lord Torrhen and the Lady of Storms, such a radical law would never have been enforceable. Aegon naturally noticed the stark contrast in expression between the High Lords and Great Liege Lords and that of the smaller nobles in the royal hall. He sighed inwardly. If I want to change the cultural system of Westeros, I can't be too hasty. If these key supporters among the Great Lords become disillusioned, ruling will only become more difficult later. It's best to take things step by step. Once the initial excitement among the minor nobles began to settle. All right, the oath ceremony will end here for now. Aegon waved a hand. The 3 lords and the army generals remain behind. We need to continue discussing military strategy. Lord Hightower, you too, Aegon called out to Lord Manfred Hightower, who had just turned to leave. As you command, Your Grace, Lord Hightower replied. Just as the other nobles were bowing and taking their leave, a white-robed septon came hurrying into the hall from outside. He stopped at the base of the throne steps, bowed low, then looked up at Aegon and said, Your Grace, the High Septon has arrived at the Great Sept of Highgarden. He awaits your summons, or for you to come meet him there. The nobles who had been leaving froze mid-step. They first looked at the septon, then turned to their king, Aegon, quietly awaiting his response. Everyone present understood one thing. Aegon had repeatedly mentioned during the military council his intent to disband the 2 militant orders of the Faith of the Seven. Now that the Targaryen dynasty, the new power from across the sea, was preparing to confront the entrenched Faith of the Seven, how could the lords who relished turmoil not be brimming with anticipation? Aegon stared coldly at the septon who dared meet his gaze and said calmly, Tell the High Septon to come to the Hall of the Oak King. I will wait for him here. Yes, Your Grace, the septon replied before withdrawing. None of the hundreds of nobles left. Instead, they returned to the Hall of the Oak King. In this coming clash between royal authority and divine power, they were ready to be witnesses, supporters, opponents, or silent observers. Although Aegon had once indirectly faced a true god who could manifest miracles, he knew in his heart that these human-centric, godless faiths were just as difficult to deal with. The Faith of the Seven's moral codes and doctrines shaped the secular culture of Westeros. And House Targaryen, descended from the Valyrian Freehold, was fundamentally at odds with the Faith of the Seven, 2 forces inherently incompatible. Aegon sat firmly upon the oaken seat, with his 2 queens seated to either side. The oaken seat was massive, spacious enough for all 3 to sit without feeling crowded. Aegon quietly speculated that when this throne was forged during the Age of Heroes, it might have been made for demigods, not mere mortals. The High Septon took far longer to arrive than Aegon had expected. Only after nearly 10 full bells had passed did a man, over 100 years old, slowly enter the great hall. Dressed in an opulent white robe trimmed with golden embroidery, he leaned heavily on a staff set with 7 gemstones and shuffled to the base of the throne steps. Aegon remained seated, his expression unreadable as he silently studied the old man. The High Septon scrutinized Aegon in turn. He looked impossibly ancient, like a crumbling piece of deadwood, something that could fall apart at any moment. Your Grace, did you summon me just to let these old bones stand here? The High Septon said slowly. His voice was so faint that if one didn't listen closely, it was almost impossible to make out what he was saying. Maester Gon stood at the very back among the other septons, appearing to have arrived with the High Septon. He gave Aegon a subtle wink. Aegon glanced at him but couldn't tell what Gon meant by it. Aegon rose and walked to the steps, looking down at the High Septon. The 7 have always been the gods I revere. When my house migrated from the Valyrian Peninsula to Dragonstone, the 7 Shrine was the only temple on the island not dedicated to Valyrian deities. The old High Septon gave a slight nod and tapped his cane before speaking. If that's the case, then I propose to crown you. Why did you never respond to my letter? Many of the lesser nobles turned to look at Aegon. It was the first time they realized that the church had already been in contact with King Aegon, and had even extended goodwill. So why was King Aegon still moving against the church and targeting the faith militant? Your Grace, the High Septon crowning you is a blessing. It will benefit your reign and allow most of the people of Westeros to embrace you as one of the faithful. A minor noble, devoted to the Seven, fell to his knees and couldn't help but offer counsel. Seldar, the Evenstar of House Tarth, also knelt and added, "Esser mate speaks true. I do not wish to see conflict between you and the faith. Such a clash would sow fear across the realm. Westeros has only just glimpsed the dawn of peace, we must not let it descend into chaos again. House Tarth is one of the great lords of the Stormlands. Their family upholds the honor of knighthood, and the traditions of knighthood are a core part of the faith of the Seven's moral doctrine." The head of House Manderley of White Harbor also knelt and pleaded sincerely, "Your Grace Aegon, I've heard your ideals. You unified Westeros to end the wars between the Seven Kingdoms. That vision is what drives me to follow you into battle. Are you now going to be the one to spark new conflict? The faith of the Seven has already accepted you as Westeros's ruler, what more do you seek? The Manderleys of White Harbor are also one of the major lords of the North. Your Grace, though I am a lord of the Vale, I believe Lord Manderley speaks wisely, please." The head of House Grafton of Gulltown also knelt in plea. Their family descends from pure-blooded Andals, and it was the Andals who brought the faith of the Seven to Westeros. For that reason, their entire house remains devout. Your Grace. Another noble dropped to his knees with a thud. "Please, Your Grace, don't force this." Another fell to his knees. "This must not happen, Your Grace." Yet another noble dropped to the floor. Aegon stood atop the throne steps, his brows slightly furrowed. In the hall were more than 700 lords, and over half of them were kneeling, many of them powerful high lords, pleading on behalf of the faith of the Seven. In that moment, Aegon felt as if he wasn't the one looking down at the High Septon from above, but rather that the High Septon, standing below, was somehow looking down on him. Aegon's hand instinctively tightened around the hilt of Blackfire. A surge of violent emotion flooded his chest. He suddenly wanted to draw his blade and cut down every lord pressuring him, to reduce them to ashes with the black dread's flame for defying his will. But in the span of a single breath, he snapped out of it, realizing that his palm was slick with cold sweat. What had come over him just now? Why had he felt such an extreme impulse? Could it be that he too was affected by the negative effects of the true dragon bloodline? He had always believed himself immune to its side effects. At that moment, a soft, slender hand grasped the one clutching his sword. Aegon turned slightly and saw his sister, Rhaenys, standing beside him, offering a gentle, encouraging smile. Queen Visenya also stepped to his left, resting lightly against his shoulder. The three siblings stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the immense pressure that hundreds of lords were now placing on House Targaryen. Aegon gripped the Blackfire sword with both hands and slammed it hard into the ground, but it did nothing to halt the swelling tide of protests echoing through the throne hall, until the sound of dragon wings filled the air. From the leaf-covered, drafty canopy of the Oak King's Hall, a black dragon's head, massive as a small mountain, poked through. Valyrian opened his enormous jaws and let out a thunderous roar, unleashing his fury at the lords who dared disrespect his master. Roar! Roar! The devastating soundwaves of the extended roar forced the lords to clutch their ears in pain. As the deafening roar finally ceased after several seconds, Aegon, bracing himself on Blackfire, lifted his chin slightly and stared down at the lords prostrated before him. Some of the nobles, terrified by the Dragonlord's wrath, trembled as they scrambled to their feet. Heads bowed, they retreated to the edges of the hall, trying to make themselves invisible, not daring to utter a word. Yet nearly 200 lords remained kneeling before Aegon, their heads still bowed. Torrhen's brow furrowed. He shouted at one of the kneeling lords, "Lord Manderley, as your liege, I command you to rise." Lord Manderley slowly lifted his head, his eyes fixed on the massive dragon head looming above them like a small mountain. The black dread's maw was slightly open, pointed directly at the gathering of nobles who had spoken up. Trembling, he replied, "Prince Torrhen, I cannot rise. I cannot betray my faith. I will not stand by and watch injustice done to my gods." With that, Lord Manderley lifted his head fully and shut his eyes, as if bracing for death. Many of the kneeling lords were moved by his fearless resolve. When forced to choose between loyalty and faith, they too chose faith. Just like Lord Manderley, they lifted their heads and closed their eyes, waiting for death to come. Torrhen was touched by Lord Manderley's devotion and no longer tried to compel him. In Westerosi values, to willingly lay down one's life for one's gods was an act of honor, something worthy of praise. Torrhen turned his head toward Aegon, his expression filled with a trace of unease. Many northern lords looked to Aegon with the same troubled gaze as Torrhen. They, too, were believers in the old gods. If one day Aegon demanded they betray the old gods or violate their doctrines, what choice would they have? A shared sense of dread swept through the lords, as if watching a fellow creature fall into the hunter's trap. Just then, the High Septon gave a soft cough and, leaning on his cane, shuffled over to a kneeling noble. He extended a hand to help him up, gently motioning for the man to rise. High Septon, you? The minor noble asked, puzzled. The old Septon waved a hand lightly and spoke with calm warmth, stand. His Grace Aegon merely wishes to disband the faith militant, not extinguish the faith of our gods. Aegon stood on the steps of the throne, silently watching as the old Septon helped the lords to their feet one by one. He did not interfere. After all, the last thing he wanted was open conflict with the very lords who had just sworn allegiance to him. From both the High Septon's actions and Maester Gon's earlier signal, it seemed there was no hostility behind their visit. After the High Septon helped more than 10 nobles to their feet, the rest began rising on their own, not wanting to tire the old man any further. Once all the faithful had stood, the High Septon gave a small nod in acknowledgement, then walked once more to the base of the throne steps. He looked up at Aegon and said, when I first received word at the Starry Sept that you had landed at Blackwater Bay, I locked myself inside and prayed for 7 days and 7 nights, seeking guidance from the gods. During that time, I ate only bread and drank only water, devoting every waking moment to prayer, moving from one altar to the next in the name of the seven. On the 7th day, the crone raised a golden lamp and showed me the path. She revealed that you, Aegon, are the true king of Westeros. That is the will of the seven. To defy your will is to defy divine decree. You wish the church to disband the warrior's sons. Then I have defied the vote of the 7-seated council. I've brought every last warrior's son with me. They await your command just outside the gates of Highgarden. Aegon gave a slight nod. He could already sense that the High Septon harbored no ill intent. Maester Gon's father had indeed supported the Targaryen cause, though Aegon still wondered whether that loyalty had deeper ties to his own father, Aerion. He gestured to Radel to bring a chair for the High Septon, so the old man wouldn't strain himself standing for too long. The High Septon sat calmly at the base of the throne, leaning on his cane with both hands. He continued speaking. The warriors' sons of the faith are the martial arm that defends the sacred moral covenant of the seven. If they are disbanded, who then shall safeguard the teachings of the seven? Please, your grace, answer me. Aegon answered solemnly, the Targaryen dynasty, of course, will uphold the moral covenant of the people of Westeros. And what if the Targaryens violate that covenant? The High Septon asked, smiling faintly as he nodded. The Seven's moral covenant clearly dictates monogamy, forbids incest, prohibits bearing bastards through lovers, and bans slavery, yet the Valyrian traditions upheld by House Targaryen violate nearly all of these tenets. All the lords within the Oak King's Hall stared wide-eyed at the High Septon. None of them had expected the old man to be bolder than they were, daring to strike directly at the Dragonlord's most vulnerable truths. House Targaryen had always upheld the customs of the Valyrian Dragonlords, marriage between kin, multiple wives and lovers, and the practice of slavery within their territories. Aegon's eyes narrowed, a cold gleam flashing within them as he stared at the High Septon. Sensing his master's rising tension, Valyrian let out a deep, rumbling growl, low and continuous, like a big cat issuing a warning. High Septon, you, Maester Gon stepped forward, placing a hand on his father's shoulder, his face filled with concern as he tried to stop him from going any further. But the High Septon swept his staff to the side, knocking away Gon's hand. Calmly and deliberately, he said, Your Grace, please do not be angered. The traditions and doctrines of the faith of the Seven have been preached across Westeros for thousands of years. They cannot be erased with a single royal decree. I came here today to help reconcile the customs of the Valyrian Dragonlords with the teachings of the Seven. If we can peacefully resolve this fundamental contradiction, then the warrior's sons will naturally have no further reason to exist. I truly believe that under unification, the Targaryen dynasty will uphold virtue more effectively than the warrior's sons ever could. That is why I came to see you, despite the objections of every Septon on the 7-seated council. You are the chosen of divine destiny. You and the faith should not be enemies. That is the wish of these old bones. What say you, Your Grace? Only now did Aegon fully believe that the High Septon bore him no ill will, that he sincerely wanted to help resolve the hidden dangers threatening Targaryen rule. The faith of the Seven was, after all, a human-born faith. Without a true god at its core, there remained a chance it could be brought under Targaryen influence. Aegon descended from the throne steps and approached the High Septon. Rhaedel brought over a chair, and Aegon sat down before him, ready to discuss the matter of House Targaryen and the traditional moral codes of Westeros. The High Septon nodded in approval at Aegon's gesture. Before the eyes of hundreds of lords and dozens of septons, the two men began their negotiations. Indeed, it was less a debate than a formal negotiation. Throughout the discussion, Aegon's two sisters occasionally spoke up, the great lords of Westeros contributed a few suggestions, and several septons from the faith offered their own perspectives. In the end, the crown, the church, and the realm's secular lords all reached a compromise. This moral debate lasted for nearly half an hour before Aegon, on behalf of House Targaryen, formally reached an agreement with the faith of the Seven and all the lords of Westeros. The Targaryen royal family moral exception treaty. In light of the need to preserve the Dragonlord bloodline, the Targaryen Dragonlords shall be exempt from the prohibition on marriage between close kin. The Dragonlords of House Targaryen shall abolish polygamy and, like all people of Westeros, may take only one wife and one queen. As Aegon the Conqueror has already married 2 wives, this clause does not apply to him. The Targaryen dynasty shall abolish slavery. This restriction shall not apply to lands outside the continent of Westeros. Opening square bracket. Closing square bracket. Aegon signed his name at the bottom of the Targaryen royal family moral exception treaty. The High Septon of the Faith of the Seven followed, along with the signatures of the 3 great lords, serving as official witnesses. With the treaty's ratification, the warriors' sons and the poor fellows were immediately disbanded. Should the Targaryen royal family violate the terms of this treaty, the Faith of the Seven shall have the right to re-establish both the warriors' sons and the poor fellows. This momentous moral negotiation, held within the Hall of the Oak King, was recorded in full by the maesters present, immortalized in paintings by court artists, and echoed through generations in the songs of wandering bards. For further details on the Targaryen royal family moral exception treaty, please refer to the Annals. Blood and Fire. A History of the Targaryen Dynasty, Volume 1, page 56, line 23. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream Creators Thoughts. 7 comments 0 vote. Chapter 77, The Grand Ceremony. In the Oak King's Hall, hundreds of lords cheered as one, celebrating the reconciliation between the Targaryen dynasty and the Faith of the Seven. They crowded around Aegon and the High Septon, escorting them all the way to the Great Sept in Highgarden. There, under the gaze of the gods, the warriors' sons of the Faith would officially disband. The Reach was a unique region of Westeros where the Faith of the Seven coexisted with the worship of the old gods. The people there associated the old gods with Garth Greenhand, their demigod ancestor from the Age of Heroes. As they stepped into the Great Sept, Septons led them slowly toward several statues, each over 10 feet tall. Aegon's gaze swept lightly over the hall. The domed ceiling was adorned with graceful paintings of the Seven and Garth Greenhand, while the stained glass windows alternately depicted the Seven and the legends of Garth. Standing before the statues of the Seven, the High Septon introduced Aegon to the sacred scriptures of the faith. During a pause, the Septon of the Great Sept respectfully shared with Aegon the legendary feats Garth had performed in the Age of Heroes, the long history of his bloodlines spread through the Reach, and how the people had cleverly blended their ancestral worship of Garth with their belief in the old gods to form a faith unique to the region. Moments later, at a signal from Orys, 5,000 members of the warriors' sons were led outside the Great Sept. 7 of their captains were brought into the sanctum. Under the supervision of the High Septon, they slowly laid down their arms and solemnly placed 7 steel swords on the altars before the statues of the Seven. Outside the sanctum, the 5,000 warriors' sons followed suit, surrendering their weapons and handing them over to the Targaryen army as instructed by the High Septon. This is but a humble offering from the faith of the Seven toward your grace's glorious conquest, the High Septon said to Aegon. Aegon graciously accepted his gesture. Cheers erupted once again in the Great Sept. The hundreds of lords were genuinely pleased with what they witnessed. In Westeros, a land shaped by thousands of years of history, divine authority and royal power had long coexisted in a state of balance, equality, and mutual restraint. The Faith of the Seven held a special privilege that testified to its influence across Westeros, the right to autonomous judgment. This right allowed the Faith to carry out private justice in disputes within a lord's territory, without needing the lord's permission. For Aegon to disarm the Faith of the Seven was an unprecedented achievement in Westeros. Without the aid of the dragons or the High Septon's cooperation, such a result could only have been won through a cataclysmic, bloody war. After the ceremony dissolving the warriors' sons, Aegon announced in the Great Sept that a 7-day founding festival would be held at Highgarden in 1 month's time, along with a grand tournament. He had chosen Highgarden as the site for the celebration because King's Landing, though under construction for 2 years, still had incomplete foundations and could not support such a large-scale event. The new kingdom had just been born, and many unresolved matters would be addressed during this grand occasion. With the day's ceremonies concluded, the lords began to file out. The High Septon gave Aegon a gentle tug, indicating that he wished to speak with him in private. Aegon gestured for Orys to bring a few personal guards and follow behind. The High Septon noted Aegon's caution with a nod of approval, then led him to the open-air prayer platform atop the tower of the High Hall. There, the king of a newly risen empire and the pontiff of an ancient faith stood side by side, gazing out over the vast plant maze of Highgarden. The High Septon looked toward Balerian's massive, mountain-like body sprawled outside the Oak King's Hall and sighed deeply. "It's been decades," he said, "and Balerian's grown even fatter." Aegon couldn't help but ask, curious, "You've seen Balerian before?" A nostalgic look came over the High Septon's face as he watched the dragon. "You could say I'm the person in Westeros who knows Balerian best. Back in Aldtown, I was the one feeding him for Demian. In the blink of an eye, more than 60 years have passed, and now Balerian has a new master." "You knew my grandfather?" Aegon asked. The pieces were falling into place, so this was the connection, the source of the High Septon's goodwill toward House Targaryen. His grandfather had left behind more than just a legacy. The High Septon spoke with deep fondness. Demian was only about 12 when he came to Aldtown, disguised as a vagrant. His real aim was to use the archives at the Citadel to map out all of Westeros. I met him while enjoying myself in a tavern. After that, we drank together, poured together, and adventured together. We became fast friends. It was then he told me who he truly was, a dragonlord of House Targaryen. I also had the rare chance to witness the most perfect creature this world has ever known, Balerian. When Demian spoke to me openly about House Targaryen's grand conquest, I was filled with excitement, moved by the boldness and ambition of the Dragonlord. At that time, I was the second son of House Hightower, without any right of inheritance. My future had only 2 paths, either enter the Citadel to become a maester, or join the faith to help solidify House Hightower's influence within the faith of the Seven. But I didn't want to live a life dictated by others. I wanted to follow Demian and achieve something worthy of being recorded in the annals of Westeros. So Demian's dream became my dream. The ambition of House Targaryen became my own. Thanks to House Hightower's support of the Citadel, members of the main branch had unrestricted access to its library. I took the initiative to steal geographical data on Westeros for him. Those years at the Citadel with Demian were the most unforgettable time of my life. We'd drink in taverns and speak freely of our ideals, meticulously planning the structure of the future kingdom after the conquest of Westeros. When we got drunk, we'd indulge ourselves with prostitutes, then head to the coast to feed and keep Balerian company. Until one day, Demian came to me in haste, saying that the kingdom of Volantis had ambushed their navy, and he had to leave Aldtown and return to Dragonstone to protect his family. I watched him take flight on Dragonback, and that was the last time I saw him. After that, we only exchanged a few scattered letters. I kept hoping Demian would return to Aldtown, that he would land in Westeros and fulfill the dreams we had as youths. But I waited for decades. By the time I rose to the position of High Septon, all I received was the news of his death. That damn liar, he deceived me for a lifetime. At that, the High Septon slammed his age-spotted palm heavily against the stone railing. Aegon turned to look at him and noticed the old man's eyes were already slightly damp. Aegon spoke softly, "My father told me that back in my grandfather's time, Volantis launched a surprise attack on House Targaryen's navy and a large fleet of merchant ships, causing immense, incalculable losses. The great conquest that had originally been planned for my grandfather's generation had to be delayed, until mine. The dream you shared with him. I'll be the one to fulfill it. That way, his soul can rest in peace." The High Septon gave a faint nod and let out a long breath, as if releasing a burden from his heart. He looked at Aegon and said sincerely, "House Targaryen may have completed the physical conquest of Westeros, but the conquest of its people's souls has only just begun. I can sense that you already have ideas and plans, but you mustn't rush things. If I hadn't stepped in to mediate, your abrupt disbanding of the warriors' sons would have ignited public outrage across Westeros, making you a target for all. Your house may command dragons, but your bodies are still mortal. Do not be reckless with change. Remember this, cough, cough. Aegon quickly stepped forward to steady the old man, gently patting his back to ease his discomfort. I understand. Please, don't worry yourself too much. Take care of your health. The High Septon slowly shook his head and brushed aside Aegon's support. Autumn's nearly over, and the temperatures dropped suddenly. It's just a bit of a chill, nothing serious. Aegon's heart sank. He remembered all too clearly. His grandfather had once said the same thing, that it was just a minor cold, not worth worrying about, and passed away the next day. The last thing he needed now was for the High Septon to follow suit. He still planned to use the old man's connections to place loyal confidants within the faith of the Seven. The High Septon was a seasoned old fox. One look at Aegon's expression, and he immediately understood what the young king was thinking. Spreading his hands, he said, "Don't expect me to do anything more for you. This time, to help clean up your mess, I even fabricated a divine revelation from the Seven. You need to understand, the Seven are the only gods known never to perform miracles in the mortal world. By deceiving all of Westeros like this, I've utterly ruined my credibility among the Septons. Even House Hightower has now distanced itself from me within the church. I took a desperate gamble, defying the conclave's vote and disbanding the warriors' sons. Right now, every Septon in the faith would love to flame me alive and drink my blood. They believe I've betrayed the faith, sold out our interests, and become nothing more than a Targaryen puppet. Once I return to the Starry Sept, I'll be sidelined, with the conclave watching my every move." Aegon gave a faint smile. "No matter. You still have the Targaryen kingdom behind you. Those Septons won't be able to stir up much trouble." "You don't understand," the High Septon replied calmly. "For thousands of years, the power of the faith and the power of the crown have been like oil and water in Westeros. Right now, I can only rely on a few personal guards to keep myself safe. I just want to live out my remaining years in peace. So don't come dragging me into your business again, you brat." Aegon was left speechless. The man was already over 100 years old and just wanted to retire. He couldn't very well force the High Septon to keep working for the Targaryens. Just then, the High Septon lifted his head and looked toward the Black Dread. Summoning all his strength, he shouted in High Valyrian, "Valyrian. Time to eat." It was the informal call and whistle used by Targaryen dragonkeepers to feed dragons. Valyrian, who had been resting, opened his crimson eyes at the sound and slowly raised his long neck, turning toward the high hall. Aegon stared at the High Septon in disbelief. Valyrian actually responded to his call. The High Septon could speak High Valyrian. What strange things had grandfather taught him? The chaos in the church had settled, for now. Time passed quickly. Another month had gone by, and fine snowflakes began drifting from the sky. Just as the Citadel had predicted, autumn was over. The continent of Westeros was entering a long winter. The duration and cycle of seasons in Westeros had always been unpredictable. Each season could last for years. As planned, the pace of the conquest began to slow. The lords' armies gradually withdrew, leaving only the liege lords in Highgarden to attend the Targaryen founding ceremony. Queen Shera of the Vale and young Lord Ronell arrived just in time, as did many other lords and envoys from across the narrow sea. Aegon's father, Aerion, made a special voyage back to Westeros by ship. Former Storm King Argilac arrived with him. Argilac was reunited with his daughter, and Lady Argilla took the opportunity to finally reconcile with her father. Aerion personally visited the High Septon. Due to the sudden death of Aegon's grandfather, the relationship with the High Septon hadn't been passed down. Aegon was only now learning of the connection. The High Septon had made great sacrifices for House Targaryen's conquest. Naturally, the Targaryen dynasty would repay him. It was clear that the High Septon's son, Maester Gon, would be granted a key role in the new kingdom. Nearly 1,000 lords, both great and small, participated in this grand founding event to support the Targaryen dynasty. At the opening ceremony, Aegon formally announced that Westeros had entered the Targaryen era. The realm would now adopt the official Targaryen calendar, the conquest calendar, beginning from the day Aegon was crowned in King's Landing, designated as Year 1 of the conquest. This founding celebration marked the turn of Year 2 in the conquest calendar. In just 2 years, Aegon had achieved incredible feats. At only 15 years old, the young Dragonlord had already earned the confidence of every lord and foreign envoy. All believed he would lead the Targaryen dynasty into an even greater age of prosperity. Throughout the celebration, Aegon moved constantly between balls and feasts, hosted council meetings, and attended the grand tourney. He had originally wanted to compete in the tourney himself, but the packed schedule, along with heavy opposition from his ministers and the Queen, forced him to give up the idea. During the Great Westerosi Noble Council held alongside the festivities, the Targaryen dynasty's administrative structure was gradually formalized. The most important outcome was the establishment of the Small Council. This group of high advisors would assist the king in governing the realm, offering counsel from their respective areas of expertise. The Small Council answered directly to the king. Only the king had the authority to enact the council's resolutions as law. If the king were absent, the hand of the king would act on his behalf. If the king were underage, a regent would exercise royal power. Appointments and dismissals of council members rested solely with the king. The hand of the king, often called the chief advisor, was the monarch's chief advisor and executor of royal authority across the Seven Kingdoms. Aegon named his close friend, Lord Torrhen of the North, as the first hand of the king in the Targaryen dynasty. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 5 comments 0 vote. Chapter 78. Aegon's Dream of Empire. In the known world, the most well-known nation with a parliamentary system was the ancient Valyrian Freehold. Even the 9 free cities largely modeled their political structures after those of the Dragonlords. The 7 kingdoms of Westeros originally had no such parliamentary institutions. The Small Council itself was a borrowed concept, an adaptation and continuation of Valyrian political culture. Now, with House Targaryen introducing this system to Westeros, it marked a significant fusion of Valyrian and Westerosi traditions. This Grand Council, which brought together all the lords of the continent, was formally written into the laws of the Targaryen dynasty and named the Great Council. It would only be convened for decisions of major importance concerning the fate of the Targaryen realm. Prior to the council, Aegon had expressed to his trusted advisors his wish to draft a unified legal code for all 7 kingdoms to be reviewed during the assembly. However, this was undoubtedly a monumental and labor-intensive task. With the founding celebrations lasting only 7 days, there simply wasn't enough time to design, refine, and approve such a code. Gaining consensus from every lord across the continent would also be no easy feat. This will make your vassals feel as though you're usurping their traditional powers. It's best to proceed slowly, Maester Gon advised Aegon while helping design the kingdom's administrative framework. The king is usurping the power of his vassals. Aegon had bristled at Gon's choice of the word, usurping, but the maester calmly explained that it was appropriate terminology under the current social order. In the end, Aegon had no choice but to delay the implementation of the unified legal code. During the Great Council, Aegon formally appointed the remaining members of the Small Council. The new dynasty's council was composed as follows. Hand of the King, Lord Torrhen Stark of the North, Chief Advisor. Master of Coin, Lord Crispian Celtigar of Claw Isle. Master of Laws, Lady Argula Durandon of the Stormlands. Master of Whisperers, Queen Shara Aran of the Vale. Master of Ships, Lord Curlis Velaryon of Driftmark. Grand Maester, Maester Gon. Another major event during the founding celebrations was the formal coronation of Visenya and Rhaenys as queens. In full view of the assembled lords of Westeros, Aegon personally placed the crowns upon the heads of both queens, symbolizing their royal status. Though Aegon's marriage to 2 queens at once was unprecedented in Westeros, what was most reassuring was that none of the attending lords showed disapproval or resistance. On the contrary, they sincerely offered their respect and blessings to the 2 queens. A royal exception treaty, signed jointly by Aegon, the High Septon, and all the lords, officially recognized Aegon I as the most unique monarch in the history of the Targaryen dynasty. With that, hundreds of lords, representing the people of Westeros, formally acknowledged and accepted the reign of both queens. With the conclusion of the 3-day Great Council, the 7-day founding celebration was nearing its end. On the final day, during the banquet for the gathered nobles, Aegon once again delivered a closing speech in the Oak King's Hall. Compared to the Great Council and the oath-taking ceremony, the nobles appeared even more solemn and dignified this time. Behind each noble stood either their offspring or personal guards, holding banners emblazoned with their house emblems. All present held their breath in silence, awaiting the new king's words. Aegon stood on the steps before the throne, overlooking his vassals. They stood neatly arranged in large formations according to their liege lords, dressed in proper attire and maintaining perfect order. Seeing this, Aegon gave a small nod, clearly pleased with the display of discipline and spirit from his new dynasty. Rhaedel stepped forward and, after reciting a few words in praise of the kingdom's founding, respectfully invited Aegon to speak. With a steady gaze and a voice like thunder, Aegon declared, "My lords. Today, we stand united, and in doing so, we forge history. Your names shall be etched into the annals of Westeros. The Targaryen dynasty will thrive and flourish in the years to come. Together with the small council, I have drafted a 5-year plan for the kingdom. Once you leave the throne room, a copy can be obtained from the maester at the door. I ask that you study it closely. Now, I shall briefly outline the strategic direction of our kingdom over the next 5 years. First, the ongoing campaigns against Dorne and the Iron Islands shall not cease. Due to the difficulties of land marches and winter supply lines, our primary conquest target for the next 5 years will be the Iron Islands. Now tell me, do you have the confidence to conquer the Iron Islands?" Fired up by Aegon's words, the nobles raised their fists high and shouted in unison, "Conquer! Conquer! Conquer!" Aegon lowered his palms to signal for silence before continuing. Second, the crown shall fund the establishment of a new citadel in Harrenhal. Our kingdom is in desperate need of a unified code of law, but let me be clear, this code is not meant to bind or exploit you. Thus, I have decided to establish an academy in Harrenhal dedicated to the study of law and the formulation of our unified legal code. Proposals for the code will be publicly posted in Harrenhal, and you are welcome to submit your opinions. I will also reside in Harrenhal for much of the coming years and personally serve as the head of the new citadel. I hope you will send your children to study there. I will be their teacher myself. This new citadel in Harrenhal will become a crucible in which the nobles of our realm come to know and understand each other. I hope your children will forge deep friendships there, and perhaps even bonds of love, so that the feuds which have plagued your houses for 1,000 years might finally find peace through them. The citadel will not only provide them with literacy and learning, I will also invite the finest and most formidable warriors in all of Westeros to instruct them in arms. Or, should you choose, you may come to Harrenhal yourselves to serve as martial instructors. My lords, do you trust your king? Do you trust me to guide and teach your children?" The hall fell silent. The nobles' first instinct was to suspect that Aegon sought their heirs as hostages, a practice well known in Westerosi history. At that moment, Hand of the King Torrhen broke the silence with a hearty laugh. "Your Grace, both my sons will be sent to the new citadel in Harrenhal. I've long yearned to learn your ancient Valyrian swordsmanship." "Ha!" The head of House Bolton from the north cried out in astonishment, "Your Grace, you'll teach the children the best swordsmanship on the continent." Aegon smiled and gave a firm nod. His duel with Torrhen on the southern bank of the Trident was now sung by bards as the legendary Battle of the Century, a tale that had spread far and wide across Westeros. The two kings had clashed in a grueling contest that lasted thousands of rounds before tens of thousands of spectators, with Aegon ultimately emerging victorious. Thanks to that legendary duel, Aegon was hailed across Westeros as the strongest man in the realm. The ancient Valyrian swordsmanship used by the Targaryen king became the stuff of legend, widely praised as the finest blade technique on the continent. Of course, Aegon's duel with the Storm King had also been spectacular, but compared to that, his clash with the king in the north was even more extraordinary. Aegon proudly boomed to the gathered lords, "Our house Targaryen ranked among the top 3 dragonlord families out of the 40 great houses of ancient Valyria. One of our ancestors once slew a golden dragon king in the famed champion dragon battle, stronger and larger even than the Black Dread." The nobles stared up at Aegon in stunned silence. Aegon chuckled inwardly. Old Valyria's long gone. As the last surviving dragonlord house, I can say whatever I like, who's going to prove me wrong? He laughed loudly and declared, "Ha ha ha, it's all true. If you doubt me, ask Archmaester Ollider for confirmation. He's right here in the royal hall. His ring, rod, and mask are all made of bronze. As a professional historian, he'll certainly know all about the champion dragon battle." A maester's chain was forged from links of different metals, each representing a specific field of study, a mark of expertise recognized by the citadel. Bronze signified mastery of history. Archmaester Ollider, is it true that House Targaryen had a champion dragonlord? A curious noble called out. Archmaester Ollider, an elderly man in his 60s, wore a bronze mask and had a long white beard. A thick ring of bronze links hung around his neck. In a firm voice, he replied, "Only the mightiest of dragonlords were eligible to fight in the champion dragon battle. The ancestor His Majesty spoke of was, according to the records, the last champion dragonlord before Valyria's destruction. He was indeed from House Targaryen, and his name was the same as His Majesty Aegon I. There is no mistake. See, I told you. Aegon laughed, then continued boasting, the swordsmanship I've trained in, Valyrian royal swordsmanship, was considered incredibly rare in ancient Valyria. It consists of 108 striking variations. Your noble houses aren't lacking in physical potential, you've just been missing a truly powerful sword art like this. This time, I'll only teach the royal swordsmanship to the first 100 children sent to the new citadel in Harrenhal. After all, I am still a king. I have duties to attend to, I can't be teaching forever, can I? At the foot of the throne, the lords erupted into a flurry of discussion. So that's why I always lose, my swordsmanship is garbage. I must make sure our children start ahead of the rest, send them to Harrenhal immediately. Right then, every lord wished they could race back home that very instant to dispatch their heirs to Harrenhal. Visenya shrank back behind Aegon, trying, and failing, not to laugh out loud. The truth was, Aegon had only learned the standard Valyrian military swordsmanship, which consisted of just 12 moves. But the way he talked about it, it sounded like a divine art. Rhaenys glanced at the lords below, now completely duped by Aegon's theatrics, and rolled her eyes at him. She was doing her best to hold back laughter too, though she managed to keep it in, for now. Aegon surveyed the room with satisfaction. The reaction was exactly what he'd hoped for. In a medieval realm like this, the root cause of the kingdom's weak administration and inability to centralize power was the sheer lack of intellectuals. Even if Aegon wanted to implement a county-based system, there simply weren't enough qualified officials. That's why the new citadel in Harrenhal was his testing ground, a crucible combining military academy, cultural exchange, ethnic integration, legal reform, and more. Aegon understood one thing clearly. If the new citadel in Harrenhal succeeded, then the Targaryen Empire would succeed. To that end, he reached out to House Hightower and the Conclave, the governing body of the citadel, requesting that a contingent of maesters be relocated to the new citadel under the pretext of studying the kingdom's unified legal code. He also instructed his father, Aerion, to travel across Essos and hire Grand Maesters at great expense to contribute to Harrenhal's growth. Maesters from Myr, alchemists from Lee, warlocks from Karth, along with the magical, herbalist, and dark medicine schools from the Aldtown Citadel, the most brilliant minds of the known world would gather at Harrenhal. Who could imagine the brilliance that might emerge from such a gathering? Aegon could hardly wait. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 79, The Hidden Hand Behind the Scenes. Aegon continued loudly, I've heard tales of the water dancers of Bravos, how they refine their martial arts to transcendent levels. Their most advanced sword technique, the water dance, allows them to duel and fight across the surface of water without causing a single ripple. I hope you will join me in refining the Valyrian royal swordsmanship, already one of the finest techniques in existence, until it, too, reaches such extraordinary heights. That is the very reason I'm teaching it to your children. And when this transcendent sword art is finally completed, I will share its fruits with every house that contributed to its creation. The lords, inspired by Aegon's grand vision and his relentless pursuit of martial perfection, felt it aligned perfectly with his reputation as the strongest man in Westeros. Any doubts they once had about his motives for summoning their children to Harrenhal vanished completely. You are truly the savior of Westeros, the true king revealed by the Crone of the Seven. Shouted the head of House Grafton of Gulltown. Your Grace, I gladly offer our family's ancestral Gull return sword technique to Harrenhal, to help shape this future transcendent sword art. The head of House Beesbury from Honeyholt stepped forward, his face full of remorse. I once believed the High Septon's proclamation, that you were the chosen of the seven, was nothing more than a shameful lie. Only now do I realize how foolish I was. Your Grace Aegon, you are the one true king of Westeros. I'm deeply ashamed for ever doubting you. The Beesbury family will gladly present our ancestral 100 Needles swordsmanship to Harrenhal, in support of your vision. Hearing this, the High Septon began coughing violently. As nearby lords turned toward him, he quickly put on a kindly smile and said, just a winter chill, ahem, this winter is colder than usual. Please take care of yourself, your holiness, said Lord Harlan of House Tyrell with concern. You are the only devout follower of the faith of the Seven to have received divine revelation in thousands of years. Cough, cough. The High Septon couldn't suppress another fit and shot Harlan a glare. This boy really doesn't know when to keep his mouth shut. I'll have to ask Aegon to teach him a lesson later. Harlan felt a chill under the High Septon's gaze. He gave an awkward smile and said nothing more. Aegon paused for a moment, took the cup of warm tea offered by Rhaedel to soothe his throat, then continued, thirdly, many of you have proposed that the capital of the kingdom be established in Highgarden. But after consulting with the small council, we've agreed that the newly built King's Landing, located at the mouth of Blackwater Bay, is far more suitable as our capital. Our kingdom's final conquest will not be limited to Westeros alone. The known world is vast and without borders. King's Landing stands across the sea from the continent of Essos. It represents our future vision. For now, I will say no more on this. Vassals of the Targaryen dynasty, the new kingdom has just been born. I ask that when you return to your territories, you spread word among your people of the Targaryens' new status. We are no longer merely lords, we are one nation, one family. The future of the world lies in Targaryen hands. Thus concludes the founding ceremony. When the capital, King's Landing, is complete, I will summon the Great Council once again, and we will hold a grand investiture to honor those who aided in the conquest of the Iron Islands and Dorne. Until then, this council is adjourned. The gathered lords bowed in unison, then erupted into cheers. Long live House Targaryen! Long live King Aegon! Long live the great conquest! One by one, the nobles stepped forward to kiss the Blackfire sword resting at the base of the 5 steps, then offered a final bow to Aegon before departing. From atop the throne steps, Aegon returned their gestures with slight nods, acknowledging each vassal in turn as he watched them exit the Oak King's Hall. A long winter had arrived, and each lord needed to return home to prepare their lands and protect their people from the cold. While meeting with the archmaesters of the citadel to discuss the unification of laws, Aegon posed a question. Why had Westeros remained locked in a feudal system of lords and vassals for thousands of years since the Age of Heroes, with no significant societal change? An archmaester specializing in meteorology offered this explanation. In our world, the lengths of the seasons are not fixed. Each can last many years. During my studies of climate patterns, I've discovered a strange phenomenon. Whenever the continent's population begins to flourish, the winters tend to grow unusually long. The bitter cold claims countless lives, driving the population back into decline until the land is once again sparsely inhabited. If one day humanity can fully withstand the harshness of nature, and the population reaches a state of true prosperity, then perhaps the feudal system that has ruled Westeros for thousands of years will finally begin to change. The Archmaester's answer struck Aegon deeply. When Aegon pressed further, asking whether there was a definite link between prolonged winters and the growth of the human population, not a single Archmaester could offer an answer. The question, they admitted, was already beyond the limits of mortal understanding. At that moment, a mystic scholar named Coluin gave Aegon a knowing smile and said, "Perhaps only the gods know the answer." Aegon couldn't tell whether this scholar of the mystical arts was hinting at something deeper, but he felt as though he had brushed against one of the hidden, darker truths of the world of ice and fire, one where divine forces may play a far greater role than they let on. After the lords left the King's Hall, hundreds of them promptly departed Highgarden, bringing along their knights and soldiers from within the Targaryen army. This was the nature of Westeros, feudalism and patronage. Military service among vassals, liege lords, and the king followed a web of dependency. During wartime, a vassal's soldiers would be summoned to join the host of their liege or king. Once the war ended, they would reclaim those same troops and return them to their own banners. To the lords of Westeros, maintaining this feudal military tradition was often seen as a mark of honor. The mighty host, once over 100,000 strong, was gradually reduced in size as each lord recalled his troops, until only a little over 30,000 remained. Even then, not all of those 30,000 belonged to the crownlands. Roughly 2/5 were household guards belonging to the key advisors on the small council, and another 2/5 were Riverlands soldiers, whose lords had remained behind in Highgarden, awaiting the formulation of the war strategy to conquer the Iron Islands. After the founding ceremony, Aegon designated Harrenhal as the temporary capital of the Targaryen dynasty. Harrenhal was located quite close to the under-construction King's Landing. By water, one could sail downstream from God's Eye and reach the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, where King's Landing was being built, in just a day. This allowed Aegon to personally oversee the construction of the royal palace. He had no intention of letting anyone secretly carve hidden tunnels into his palace. For the inner court of House Targaryen's future seat, Aegon planned to blend the architectural ideals of both the Forbidden City and London, seeking a design that was secure, rational, and comfortable. Within Highgarden stood the Hall of Briars, once the central war chamber of the Kingdom of the Reach. The hall was entirely wrapped in thick, thorn-covered vines. Walls, windows, and even the roof were overgrown with barbed plants, making the place unwelcoming and difficult to approach. After the founding ceremony, the Hall of Briars once again became the venue for military strategy. Aegon, Queen Visenya, his father Aerion, former Lord Admiral Daemon, former Storm King Argilac, several great lords from the Riverlands and the Reach, and the senior members of the small council all gathered around a massive oaken war table. The table itself was carved from a 1,000-year-old oak tree into a detailed model of the Reach, with miniature banners representing the various noble houses placed across its surface. Now, the table had been expanded, joined with new sections representing the rest of Westeros, including the full geography and distribution of noble power across the continent. Curlees, the master of ships, was the one reporting on the current situation in the Iron Islands. Pointing to a cluster of islands west of the Riverlands, he explained clearly, the Iron Islands are currently engulfed in chaos. House Hoare ruled the Ironborn for generations, but in a single night at Harrenhal, the flames of the Black Dread consumed their entire direct bloodline. Blackheart, Harren and all his sons perished in the fire. On Harlaw, a man named Corin Volmark, whose grandmother was Harren's grandfather's sister, proclaimed himself the rightful heir of the Blackblood kings and is now attempting to seize power. Though Curlees was still young, he showed no hesitation before such a high-ranking audience. His father, Daemon, was inwardly pleased, impressed by the confidence and capability of his second son. Corlys's finger slid to another island in the chain as he continued, but not all Ironborn are willing to accept his claim. On Old Wick, the priests of the drowned god gathered beneath the ribs of the sea dragon Naga. There, they placed the driftwood crown on the head of one of their own, a barefoot prophet named Lodos, who claims to be the living son of the drowned god and is said to perform miracles. He shifted his finger again to another island, and Aegon, along with the others, followed his explanations closely as Curlees continued. Greatwick, Pike, and Orkmont have all produced their own self-proclaimed kings. Their followers are already clashing by land and sea. It's said that the seas between the islands are so full of corpses that they've drawn swarms of sea monsters. Hundreds of krakens have reportedly surfaced, drawn by the scent of blood. Do such legendary creatures really exist? Asked Hand of the King Torrin, who had lived his entire life inland and couldn't hold back his curiosity. They do, Aegon affirmed. I saw one with my own eyes. It was nearly 100 meters long, resembling an enormous octopus, its body covered with shell-like barnacles and coral. Aegon recalled the giant kraken from his past life, the one captured by House Valentine near the city of Oros on the Valyrian Peninsula. That monstrous beast had been sold to him, and when he fed it to Tiamat, it enhanced her greed feast by one level. Without a doubt, it had been a creature of extraordinary power. Really? I've never seen one. Visenya raised an eyebrow and looked at Aegon, her tone tinged with disbelief. Aegon chuckled. Haha, you just haven't been that lucky. Curlees spoke with solemnity. According to the intelligence we've gathered from the Ironborn, krakens do resemble octopuses, but they aren't as massive as your grace described. It's said that the largest kraken kept by Harren the Blackheart is only about 20 meters long. But even that is a force not to be underestimated in naval warfare, said Manfred, head of House Hightower. Edmund, head of House Tully, added, it seems the krakens of the Iron Islands are under some kind of mysterious constraint, they can't operate beyond the Iron Islands. When House Hoare conquered the Riverlands, we never once encountered kraken attacks. Could it be that sea creatures can't survive in freshwater? Aegon asked Edmund. Edmund found himself at a loss for words. Setting aside the tangent, Aegon grew serious and addressed the room. The main forces for the conquest of the Iron Islands will come from the Reach and the Riverlands. Both regions will deploy their entire fleets to attack the Iron Islands from two directions, aiming to subdue all Ironborn forces in a single strike. I will personally ride Balerion and provide air support from above. Once the Iron Islands campaign concludes, I will grant 2 ducal titles, one, Lord of Rivers, for the Riverlands lords to contend for, and the other, Lord of the Reach, for the Reach lords. How much territory you can claim in the Iron Islands will depend on your own abilities. Manfred of House Hightower and Edmund of House Tully were visibly elated. They respectfully volunteered to lead the vanguard and pledged to give their utmost. The head of House Redwyn of Arbor and the head of House Seri, who ruled the Shield Islands, both major lords of the Reach, also voiced their support, promising to dispatch their entire fleets. Both houses carried the Greenhand bloodline, though they were slightly less dominant in other respects than House Hightower, their naval strength was on par. In fact, House Redwyn's naval power far surpassed even that of House Hightower. Harlan, head of House Tyrell, opened his mouth but ultimately closed it in resignation. House Tyrell had no navy and thus no real voice in this nearby campaign against the Iron Islands. Harlan could only bide his time, gathering strength in silence, hoping to shine during the future war for Dorne and compete for the remaining ducal title in the Reach. What Harlan didn't know was that the war for Dorne would prove far more brutal than the conquest of the Iron Islands. Watching the Reach lords bicker and jockey for influence, Edmund of House Tully felt a surge of quiet relief that his house lay within the Riverlands. The lords of the Reach, each one with the Greenhand bloodline, were all comparable in strength to House Tully, and Houses Hightower and Redwyn were even stronger by no small margin. The Reach was indeed prosperous, able to produce so many powerful lords. No wonder His Grace Aegon had decided to divide it into two duchies. Aegon was quite pleased with the enthusiasm of the Reach and Riverlands lords. The Targaryen navy had suffered heavy losses in the sea battle off Gulltown in the Vale and was no longer capable of sustaining a major naval campaign. The fleets of the Reach and Riverlands would fill that void for the Royal Navy. Aegon continued, once you return to your fiefdoms, make your winter preparations swiftly. Then begin mobilizing your navies and gathering military supplies. Lord Crispian, the Master of Coin, will purchase another batch of large ships from the disputed lands to strengthen the royal fleet. When the time comes, our three fronts will strike together. The Iron Islands will have no choice but to surrender. We are now in the third year of the conquest. At the start of year 4, the Iron Islands campaign will officially begin. At that same time, the rebellion suppression in the Vale's Three Sisters Islands will also commence. Queen Visenya will ride her dragon into battle, coordinating with the Vale's navy. Winter is coming. May we all do our part. Shara Aran, the Master of Whisperers, bowed to Queen Visenya, who returned her thanks with a smile. The major lords of the Reach and Riverlands reaffirmed their commitment to the war effort. With the strategic plan for the Iron Islands finalized, the War Council adjourned, and the ministers began to disperse. Aegon and the small council, accompanied by 20,000 soldiers and several hundred maesters and maesters' boys relocated from Aldtown, departed for Harrenhal, the temporary capital of the Targaryen dynasty, to begin preparations for constructing the new citadel. Before that, they would return to King's Landing, still under construction, to inspect its progress. After more than 2 years on campaign, Aegon had grown somewhat attached to the place where he first set foot in Westeros. He also planned to take the 1,000-year-old oak sand table from the war room in Briar Hall to Harrenhal, to use as a military map during small council discussions. Before leaving the Highgarden Royal Palace, Aegon made the following arrangements. He appointed Lady Rhaedel as head of the Royal Garden Court. Highgarden would now have 2 stewards. Lady Rhaedel would manage palace affairs and matters related to the royal women, while Harlan, head of House Tyrell, would oversee external matters such as the hedge maze. Aegon wasn't in a rush to let Lady Rhaedel inherit the surname of House Gardener. She was a bastard, no matter her noble blood, she couldn't rise to high station overnight. Granting legitimacy to a bastard would shake the traditional inheritance customs of Westeros and draw scorn from all the realm's vassals. Only when Aegon had centralized enough power within the dynasty would he consider establishing a Targaryen cadet branch for his bastards. This concept was a backup plan, a safeguard for the continuation of House Targaryen. For now, it was just a rough idea in his mind, still in need of refinement. The royal family and the king's ministers departed Highgarden one after another. They boarded carriages and arrived at the ferry by the riverside market, where they took boats down the Mander River to the Blackwater Rush. After a few more kilometers, they transferred to another boat that would take them along the Blackwater to King's Landing. At that time, the roads across Westeros were in terrible condition, nothing but muddy tracks, so river travel remained the most efficient and comfortable way to move about. The Targaryen royal army and the Riverlands forces could only make the long trek to the Crownlands and the Riverlands by land. There, the Crownlands troops would be led back to their respective fiefdoms by their lords, while the remaining royal army would be split, one force heading to garrison King's Landing, the other to Harrenhal, the temporary capital. Aegon flew above the Mander on Balerion, soaring through the skies as the royal fleet slowly advanced along the river below. Looking back, he saw Lady Rhaedel standing atop Highgarden's white walls, gazing at him from afar. Aegon whispered, "Farewell, my garden." Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com, BlurryDream. BlurryDream creators' thoughts. 3 comments 0 vote. Chapter 80. The Commander of the City Watch. Valyrian carried Aegon southward, accompanied by Vhagar with his blue-gray scales, and Merryxes with her golden eyes and silver scales. As they flew over Bitterbridge, snowflakes drifted down like feathers. Flying north from Highgarden, the temperature had gradually dropped. Back in Highgarden, there had only been a light dusting of snow in the early morning. But now, as they reached the edge of the Crownlands at Bitterbridge, the ground was already blanketed in white. Aegon and his sisters had no choice but to bring their dragons down from the sky. The Targaryen family's half-covered dragon saddles could only shield them from strong winds, but the cold at high altitude was unbearable, even a gentle breeze cut like a blade. Aegon found himself wondering whether he should design a fully enclosed, carriage-style dragon saddle. He couldn't help but applaud his own idea, even imagining a tank-like saddle equipped with a siege crossbow mounted at the front, something that would allow dragon riders to contribute more actively in battle, rather than being dead weight to their dragons. "What are you thinking about? I called you twice," Rhaenys shouted, wrapped tightly in a pink bearskin coat. Snapping out of his thoughts, Aegon replied from atop his saddle, "Nothing. I just want to stay on Balerian's back. His body's like a furnace. As long as the wind doesn't hit, it's actually pretty warm." At that moment, Aegon felt like a student refusing to get out of bed on a cold winter morning. As a dragon tamer, staying beside his dragon not only kept him warm but also allowed him to practice blood sorcery and cultivate spiritual resonance. It was a cozy arrangement. Visenya rode up beside Balerian and asked, "So, what now? Do we wait for the royal fleet, or head back to King's Landing ourselves?" Aegon dismounted, rubbing his cold hands together and breathing out a puff of white mist. "We'll wait and go back with them. The kingdom is still newly founded, and there are plenty of Westerosi who resent us Targaryens. In this bitter winter, with people hungry and cold, we can't rule out the chance of running into trouble." Just then, a small group of knights came galloping toward Bitterbridge. The lead rider wore thick leather armor, bearing the sigil of a centaur. Even from afar, the knight shouted, "Your Grace. Is that King Aegon?" Aegon smiled and said to his sisters, "This centaur family lives right at the edge of the Crownlands. Let's rest at their castle for a bit." During the Great Council at the kingdom's founding, the initial borders of the Targaryen Crownlands had been outlined. The Crownlands had absorbed several castles and territories from neighboring regions: Stormlands, the Reach, the Westerlands, the Riverlands, and the Vale. Now, aside from the north, the Crownlands were the largest region in Westeros. Had the north bordered the Crownlands, Aegon might have carved out a piece for fairness, sake. Key castles bordering the Crownlands included, from the Stormlands, Grassy Vale, Kingswood, Sharp Point, and Massey's Hook. From the Reach, Bitterbridge and Highgarden as an enclave. From the Westerlands, Golden Tooth. From the Riverlands, Stone Sept, Pink Maiden Castle, Acorn Hall, High Heart, and Harrenhal. From the Vale, Bloody Gate. Among these, Aegon had taken the most from the Riverlands. That was because, at the time, the Riverlands had no ruling lord. No one had the authority to stop Aegon's expansion. The houses Tully and Frey were still competing for the title of Lord of the Riverlands, so neither dared to offend Aegon, fearing he might grant the title to their rival. The families of Sharp Point and Massey's Hook in the Stormlands had been loyal supporters of the Targaryens from the very beginning, and now, at last, they had formally become part of the Crownlands. The Westerlands were punished with the confiscation of a major gold mine, Golden Tooth. In the Vale, Bloody Gate had already been taken by Queen Rhaenys, who showed no intention of withdrawing her forces. Given that the Vale had resisted the Royal Navy and inflicted heavy losses, Bloody Gate was deemed a fitting punishment and was thus annexed into the Crownlands. Aegon suspected that his sister Rhaenys had sensed the growing threat posed by their elder sister, Visenya. Visenya held numerous direct vassals in Crackclaw Point and was highly capable both in military and political affairs. During the Great Council, many lords had openly shown her their favor. To these lords, there was only one throne, but two queens. And judging by the internal dynamics of the Targaryen royal family, it was clear that Visenya's future children had a far better chance of inheriting Aegon's crown. Visenya was striking and fearless, passionate and resolute, with a commanding presence. Her charisma was undeniable. Even in a world where most of the lords were men, they couldn't help but admire her strength. All of this left Rhaenys feeling deeply unsettled. Her only way of countering her sister was by clinging more closely to Aegon, pestering him to fulfill his husbandly duties more often. She was even willing to share his bed with Lady Rhaedel if it meant staying close to him. Just then, the head of House Caswell approached and knelt before Aegon with proper deference, offering respectful greetings to both queens as well. He was well-versed in courtly manners and made a solid first impression on Aegon. At his warm invitation, Aegon and his sisters accompanied him to his family castle. The stronghold, made of stone and timber, stood not far from Bitterbridge. Calling it a fortress might have been generous, it looked more like a mound of stone and dirt. It was, without doubt, the shabbiest noble fortress Aegon had ever seen, in even worse shape than the temporary Aegon fort he'd built in King's Landing. Rhaenys entered the place reluctantly, clearly displeased, while Visenya was gracious and unfazed. At the entrance, she casually took a piece of bread from a tray held by 3 royal family members, daughters of the head of House Caswell, dipped it in salt, and tasted it. This simple act filled the lord with joy, and he welcomed the royal guests with even greater warmth. In Westeros, once a guest accepts bread and salt under a host's roof, the guest right is invoked, binding both sides to peace for the duration of the visit. To violate this sacred tradition is to offend both the old gods and the new. Guest right is an ancient Westerosi custom passed down through the ages, a sacred law upheld throughout the 7 kingdoms, which pride themselves on their hospitality. Aegon also smiled and took a piece of bread, dipping it in salt, not to eat, but simply as a gesture. It was always better to be cautious. For the 2 days they spent at the Earthen Castle, Aegon had his attendants taste every meal before he touched it himself. It wasn't that Aegon was unapproachable, but with the kingdom newly founded, a little caution was only prudent. Over those 2 days, the contrast between the 2 queens became even more apparent. Visenya, despite the heavy snow, never once skipped her sword drills. It was a discipline she had kept for more than a decade and would not abandon, no matter the weather. Rhaenys, on the other hand, spent nearly every moment with Aegon. They played together in the snow, went ice fishing along the Mander, and Aegon would often invite her for wild, passionate bouts out in the open, and Rhaenys never turned him down. The personalities and habits of the royal trio didn't go unnoticed. Commoners and nobles alike observed and remembered, passing stories from one to another. After all, this was the first time Valyrian dragons had ever appeared in Westeros, and everyone was eager to learn more about the new king and the character of his royal household. As news spread that the 3 royals were staying temporarily in Bitterbridge, nearby nobles began to arrive from their respective strongholds. The founding celebration of the Targaryen dynasty was still fresh in memory. Though the lords had only just returned to their lands, their curiosity and reverence for the new royal family drove them to bring their families to Bitterbridge for a glimpse of the Valyrian dragons. Head of House Caswell proved himself an astute and loyal bannerman. He dispatched a small force to clear the surrounding area of beggars, mercenaries, and vagrants. Even visiting nobles had to wait. He first sought King Aegon's permission before allowing them to pay their respects. Aegon took note of all of it. This centaur-sigilled family was indeed clever and alert, without the polished pretentiousness of someone like Harlan Tyrell. They had truly earned Aegon's favor. After 3 days at the Caswell family's earthen castle, the royal fleet finally arrived. As Aegon and his sisters boarded the ship, he suddenly paused. Standing on the deck, he looked back toward the earthen stronghold. The sheep pen beside the center-bannered fortress was now completely empty. Over 100 sheep had ended up in the bellies of the 3 giant dragons. This already impoverished land had poured out nearly all its wealth and provisions just to host their king. It was easy to imagine how harsh the coming winter would be for the Centaur family's domain. Aegon stood at the bow, watching the nobles gathered on the riverbank to see them off. For the first time, he truly felt the simplicity and sincerity of the people of Westeros. In the dead of winter, that small gesture of warmth quietly seeped into his heart. Aegon called out loudly to the Centaur clan's lord, "What's your name?" Even after spending 3 days in the man's hall with both queens, Aegon had never managed to remember his name. Not even the house name the man had introduced himself with stuck in his memory, only the sigil, a centaur. For the past few days, Aegon had addressed him that way. Yet the centaur lord had never taken offense and continued to serve the royal guests with genuine devotion. The lord of the Centaur house dropped to his knees in the snow and shouted with all his strength to the ship growing smaller on the river, "Your Grace. My name is Bane Caswell." But the ship had already drifted far downriver, and Bane couldn't tell whether Aegon had heard him or not. Aboard the royal vessel, Aegon turned and waved to Orys, his lord commander and head of the royal guard. "Your Grace, I'm here. What do you need?" Orys asked respectfully. Aegon said, "Transfer the noble who answered me just now into the royal guard. The kingdom is newly formed, and I plan to establish a city watch to maintain order in Harrenhal and King's Landing. That man is quick-witted, he's got potential. Look into his background. If nothing serious comes up, appoint him commander of the city watch." "I'll see to it at once," Orys nodded, then asked, "Your Grace, which house is he from? What's his name?" Aegon fell silent for a moment. Truth be told, he hadn't clearly heard the man's name or house. "The Centaur Lord," Aegon replied. Up to 20 chapters ahead for now. P. Atrian Comp. BlurryDream.